There's some new people out there. My name is Phil Bertolini. I'm the co-director for the Center for Digital Government and your program host, along with Terry Takai, my co-director at the center. To begin, here's a quick review of some housekeeping notes on the event format and how you can participate. So let's now get ready for the virtual event. We'll be following the same format as yesterday. So you're going to notice that you're all muted right now, and you're going to remain muted until during the opening general session, but unmuted for Q&A. So you have a couple viewing options, and the best ones that we can say, and they're on the upper corner of your screen, is active speaker view would be great for the opening session and the keynote in the fireside chat. But you may want to go to gallery view when we go to breakout sessions in the CIO roundtable so you can see everybody on the screen. You can use the chat feature to communicate with your peers and share best practices from your organization. You may also want to send a chat to our CDG help desk if you need any assistance. Now, questions for any Q&A portions of the program will only be monitored via the virtual hand raise. Chats will not be monitored for session questions. All right, to participate in the breakout sessions in the CIO roundtable, use the virtual hand raise in your participants tab at the bottom of your screen. Please do not speak until the moderator calls on you. Then remember to unmute yourself. Be aware if you raise your hand, because if you lower it, you'll lose your place in line. So don't do that. Now, before we look at today's agenda, I would like to ask a couple of our CIOs out there from yesterday to see how they've had. Ed Winfield, are you out there, Ed? We're going to unmute Ed and bring him in. Can we unmute Ed? Here he is. Ed, come on in.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Well, what a great session we had yesterday. I was reflecting on it. Still excited about Renee's presentation. That was just so interesting. Some of the points she made about finding allies, asking for help, the competency and the confidence of you and your role. I thought those were all great takeaways. And I was thinking about the service that they provide to NASA. They get a call to the help desk. Hey, I got a problem with my iPad, right? Well, all right, I'll send someone over. Oh, I'm in the space station. So we think we've got challenges while we provide support. So I thought that was really interesting. Had some great discussion in our breakout about digital opportunities and all of that. I've kind of packaged that all up in the idea of a crisis of opportunity we have ahead of us. Technology's really been in the spotlight here through this in terms of providing our services, people logging on remotely, digital services, all of that. And now with some of the new funding coming at us, we really got the more opportunities than we maybe can handle. So the idea of prioritizing those and trying to come up with the right plans there. And then I think just the whole idea of collaboration, Phil, with these kinds of sessions, return to office is going to be out in front of us. And the idea of collaborating on what works, what doesn't work, what kind of creative ideas are out there on how people are staying in touch and how's this new hybrid organization work and all that. I think that's going to be really important and another great takeaway that we can have from this kind of a session. So those are some of my impressions from yesterday.
Ed, thanks for sharing that. And I couldn't agree more. It was an excellent day of sessions, but I love the collaboration and engagement part of what we're able to do. It's virtual right now, but we're making it work. So Ed, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I'd like to invite Rob Lloyd. Rob, come on in. We're going to unmute you and come on in and share your comments.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, actually, just building on those comments. Number one, I'm realizing how much I miss you guys and the ability to get together and just trade notes and kind of bask in each other's presence. Another thing just that's driving home is how much we need to model and practice the self-care after a grinding year of worthy work, but really difficult times. And so along with that, I think the lessons I'm taking away from this is the next year is really going to be about us supporting this digital workforce and digital public. It's going to be about us using technology to really reinforce equity in our communities, everything from social justice to housing and homelessness, even food insecurity. And then just also to lean on each other as a community. We have so many good answers in this room and people who are doing things for the right reason. I want to say I'm also realizing that we've had great partners throughout. And a lot of those folks are actually in this room from all the companies that we've worked with as we've very quickly had to come up with the answers that helped our organizations. So thank you to those folks who've stood with us and stepped up when the time was special and of need. And then the last thing is just let's stick with each other. And for the Center for Digital Government and GovTech, and what's been 20 years that I've gotten to work with you guys, and every corner you've been a friend and an ally. So let me pause and say thank you to you guys as well.
You know, Rob, that 20 years went by lightning fast, didn't it? We've all been working together. Ed, we've worked together for so many years. I mean, it's just time has gone by, but what we do know is we do know how to collaborate and we do know how to engage. And Rob, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now I'd like to welcome in my partner, friend, and co-director of the CDG, Terry Takai. Terry, how was your day yesterday?
Well, I feel it was a great day yesterday. And certainly I echo what Ed said about just getting a lot of really great tips from Renee. She's just, if you could imagine, her challenges of being in that room, it's just, certainly something that I can relate to. The second piece is we had a great discussion on, how folks are actually looking at their budgets and how they're looking at being able to use these Stimulus Act fundings. And, one of the things that I got to say is that everybody's ready. They're all thinking about how they might be able to use the funding. They're looking at, how to prioritize that versus the other demands for that funding. And the other thing that I was encouraged about is that several folks said that their budget crisis was not as deep as they had anticipated it to be, which is really good news because it then gives them the opportunity to really have the funding to do the modernization that I think is so important going forward. So yeah, great day. And we're looking forward to the session today, Phil.
Thanks, Terry. We're going to have a great agenda here like we did yesterday. But I also want to remind everybody, don't forget to have your cards ready because at the end of the day, we're going to have something fun to do as well. So Terry and I will be joining you all at the end to have some fun. So Terry, again, thank you. Yesterday was great. And what we're looking forward to is what we can do today to really drive those conversations even farther. So I want to take another opportunity today too and share our latest program news again. As I mentioned yesterday, we just launched our new industry masterclass from the Center for Digital Government, Mastering the State and Local Government Market. That's that 12-part certification course. Now, this course, again, is to help our partners excel at doing business with government, but also for the government people to have that understanding that when they come in the room, they know what you do and why you do it. So we think it's an important program, and we look forward to more people participating. So we have another terrific agenda for today. We're going to begin with a keynote presentation looking at how to plan your technology agenda for the future. That'll be followed by a look at what the budget and funding landscape will bring in the coming months. Now, following that opening session, we'll break into groups, and that's where we get to talk and engage, and we want to hear from you. Finally, we'll do a CIO roundtable and bring the whole group back together for another chance to share ideas, issues, and experiences. And then we'll have that fun card game that we're going to do. Remember, the public sector, you can win a $20 gift card. In the private sector, it's all about bragging rights. So make sure that you're ready to play. So let's get started with our keynote speakers today. And it's our own Dustin Heisler, the Chief Innovation Officer, and Joe Morris, our Vice President of Research. Let me give you a little bit about each. So Dustin, he was the finance director, and later he was the CIO for Manor, Texas, a small city outside of Austin. And Dustin quickly built a track record and reputation as an early innovator in civic tech. A member of Code for America's original steering committee, he pioneered government use of commercial technologies not before used in the public sector. In 2010, Dustin launched Manor Labs, a website that let residents submit their own ideas and vote other people's ideas up or down. He looked to the private sector to help broaden the adoption of those and other civic innovations, joining California-based Spigot as Director of Government Innovation. Now, while at Spigot, a company that makes crowdsourcing and innovation management software, Dustin helped design and deploy innovation programs for New York City, Bogota, Colombia, and even part of the space program through NASA's Langley Research Center. And Renee, you probably worked with Renee, Dustin. Notably, Dustin's work has been featured in Wired, Fast Company, the Wall Street Journal, Inc., and the Today Show on NBC. Now, as Chief Innovation Officer, Dustin has a strategic role to help shape the company's products, services, and future direction. Primarily, he leads eRepublic Labs, a market connector created as an ecosystem to educate, accelerate, and ultimately scale technology innovation within the public sector. So welcome, Dustin. Joe Morris is a national keynote speaker on issues, trends, and drivers impacting state and local government and education. He has authored publications and reports on funding streams, technology investment areas, and public sector priorities, and has led roundtables, projects, and initiatives focused on issues within the public sector. Joe has conducted state and local government research with eRepublic since 2007 and knows the ins and outs of government on all levels. You know, the other piece about Joe too is Joe knows government. Remember that, because over and over again, you will hear the insight that he has in regard to funding streams, the market, and what government really needs to do next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to welcome in Dustin and Joe. Dustin and Joe, come on in. It is all yours.
Thanks so much, Phil. Great to be here. A lot of familiar faces. So looking forward to sharing about the foundation for the future of GovTech. As many of you know, Joe and I like to really focus on the future and how the future is coming at CIOs, what you need to do to prepare for it, and what the foundation is. And so you'll notice today as we start to go through our presentation that we've got a variety of different things we're going to cover. We're going to talk a little bit about the now, then we're going to look at what's next, and then we're going to talk about the foundation. And then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. Joe and I like to do what we call Ask Us Anything. So feel free to save those questions to ask us anything live at that point. But we're looking forward to diving into some of the things you need to know about the market today and some of the things on our radar for the future. Joe, you ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, we'll dive in. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the now. I'll kick it off by looking at some of the macro trends that are impacting society, some of the bigger picture things that are happening. Number one, we're in this period of what we call hyperconnectivity. There's a lot of ubiquitous connectivity that's across the country. And I just want to lay out what's happening in the state of this foundational element of infrastructure for government. So, I mean, right now on Earth, there's about 7.9 billion people. And what's interesting is we've kind of reached this tipping point now where we now have more devices that are connected on planet Earth than we have people. So about 22 billion devices that are connected on the planet, 7.9 billion people. But this is something that is on what we call an exponential growth curve, meaning that these numbers are not just incrementally or literally going up, they're actually doubling. And so it's really interesting to see even some of the new forms of connections aren't at-home connections, they're car vehicle connections, they're things that are in the built environment, self-driving cars, other types of things that have cellular chipsets that are necessary for kind of that back-end data component. So really interesting dynamic there. Now, when we look at how that foundation for connectivity is being used and kind of what that means for us now, we've reached what we call critical mass, where we have a large number of individuals that are using that foundation to do things. They're finding ways to kind of unlock additional value. They're creating companies. In fact, even during the pandemic, we saw a ton of economic activity and entrepreneurial activity as people found ways to take that excess time and some of the new market opportunities to build companies. No one solved the educating your kids from home dynamic yet, but hopefully that's coming soon. So when we look at the connectivity landscape from kind of a global standpoint, right now we're about 58 to 59% of the world that is connected to the internet. A lot more opportunity to kind of tap into the global talent pools that are there. Now, if you watch the news, you're seeing a lot of headlines around what's happening in low Earth orbit. You've got SpaceX and a variety of other companies that are trying to blanket the world in these cube satellites that will provide an infrastructure that can be used to help connect the rest of the planet. A lot of this capability is also going to be offered up to those in rural areas. So for those of you that are looking at this kind of rural broadband, the digital divide, the disconnect that we have here, this is something that's also kind of really targeting some of these areas. On top of that foundation for connectivity, you've also got a lot of things that are happening as it relates to cellular connectivity as well. We've reached the era of 5G. As we start to see 5G rollouts in dense urban cores, we expect to see a lot more innovation that leverages this infrastructure for self-driving and autonomous transportation infrastructure, delivery robots, all kinds of new use cases that are emerging, leveraging this low latency environment. Now, closer to home in the US, we know the digital divide is very real. We're sitting at about what we consider 85 to 86% of the United States being connected. to the internet. Now, depending on who you talk to, whether it's the FCC or a state government agency, that number tends to shift a little bit, because what do we define as connectivity? Is it the means of having access at home, or is it a cellular device that provides that access? So a lot of different debates that are happening here. But for those of you that read the State of the State addresses or saw GovTech's coverage on that, we know the number one tech policy priority for 2021, and it was the same in 2020, was broadband. And so there's going to be a lot more emphasis on this. You'll notice this is a key pillar of both the American Rescue Act plan, where there was allocations for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, as well as some of the new proposed infrastructure spending that's coming out. Now, all of this connectivity, all of these individuals that are doing things are now leveraging that to not just consume, but to create. And so there's a lot of what we call energy and engagement on top of it. So what's on the screen right now is what you see happening online every 60 seconds. So a wide variety of activity. You've got 350,000 tweets that are sent, 210,000 snaps that are posted and then poof, disappear, 156 million emails, right? A lot of those are probably sitting in our inboxes right now. A lot of activity, a lot of engagement. The key pillar here is that we're no longer consumers, we're creators when you think about the macro trends in society. Now, combining all of this together, we've also reached this point where infrastructure and cloud-based infrastructure has allowed what we call an unbundling effect of all kinds of dynamics. You used to be in this point where you would be locked in. You'd have to buy something and take all of those capabilities. Those days are over. Now, everything, like if you look at this desk, is being virtualized and replaced by technology. And the same is true with kind of what's happened in the pandemic. We've relied more on the virtualization of some of these services. I mean, think about things that some of the older demographic bands never did, like ordering groceries from home. Now they're actually users, they're power users of some of these dynamics. And so these behavioral shifts have caused some of the laggards with technology adoption and new technology adoption to rapidly jump into actually some of the innovative categories. And lastly, all of this is not new to you that have been in the trenches navigating, all of the uncharted areas that we're in right now. So hats off to all of you for doing that. But the pace of change and the adoption of technology has also significantly shifted and is on an exponential growth curve. I mean, you take major society shifting things that have happened over all of these decades, and now it's compounding, and now it's happening much quicker. And now new behaviors are emerging in a matter of months, in a matter of weeks. And so you don't have time to wait. You have to really look at, how do we leverage this technology? How do we put it to use? And ultimately, what is the foundation that allows me to make the most use of what's happening around the corner? So change in the past in government, was something that, many expectations that citizens had on government had a hard time breaking through. And agencies were overwhelmed with just the complexity of managing the day-to-day, the legacy processes, those other types of things. This was the past. This was kind of prior to the pandemic, looking at how things were done. People had great expectations for us, but it was very difficult to prioritize how to actually do that. Fast forward to how change is happening in government today, and we're seeing, a lot of synergies where now government is meeting expectations of citizens, but also finding ways to lead the charge and introduce new types of services that better serve the people. I mean, we've seen a great reimagining of how government services can be delivered in light of the pandemic. We saw all kinds of cities take not just, the ability to pay your bills and other things and put it online, but the ability to plug in and engage in democratic processes and put that online. So a lot of really great things. Joe's going to do a deeper dive on some of those bigger picture trends and how agencies like yours have responded.
All right, let's take a look at what we've got in terms of what we're calling the now and government. And if you look at what we've seen over the last 12 months on the next slide, you've all played a number of roles in terms of government, right? Communicating around COVID-19 closures and outbreaks and all of things, but also an enforcement role when we look at all of the rules and regulations and licenses and everything that came along with the past 12 months in terms of inspections and all of that. As a employer of individuals as well, and a whole new series of platforms and communication and everything has emerged. And we've covered this extensively on government technology. Dustin just hit on it a little bit, but portals, tracking, more open, more connected. And I think that's really interesting. And just last night, I saw legislation out of the state of California. If we move to the next slide, it's not just in portals and digital services. It's around transparency. It's around engagement. And this is something that's starting to stick. A bill was just passed in the state of California that took the meeting and agenda minutes and the virtual aspect of citizen participation and made it permanent, not just something that came with the pandemic and will go away and disappear when this goes away. But we're seeing this at scale, right? Frankly, citizen engagement was tough. You had to take the day off maybe from work and go down to City Hall and spend 3, 4, 5 hours sitting there to be heard. And now all of these things have changed. You have the ability to engage, pop into that meeting. That's going to make it so more individuals can get connected. We also saw a flood of citizen requests, both at the state and local level, whether it was unemployment, whether it was just trying to figure out whether your government was open. The surge of citizen communication couldn't be met by traditional staff. And we saw the rise of the chatbot. And I think that's another trend that we saw accelerated over the pandemic, kind of the 0 to 60 moment, was the use of chatbots. And that's something too that we've not only seen kind of rise, but mature. I mean, frankly, the early days of chatbots, they were kind of cumbersome to engage with. And now they're frankly a lot better. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, public meetings have all went virtual, remote participation is up, and we're engaging a new community of individuals, right? And that can go, as a parent of young children, it'd be very difficult to get in line and engage with my community, but now that's possible. We've also seen some challenges, right? Words that weren't even in our lexicon before, like contact tracing. Who knew what that even was? But now we're starting to see that, but we're also seeing it being outsourced, whether that's what we've seen with Apple and Google and many of these other platforms that have come up to track the outbreak. It's also given rise to privacy concerns, right? Just using my smartphone, does that make it that you can know where I go and where are the barriers? And it's created a fragmented experience in terms of who's responsible for all of this information. That blending, though, has created some positives. Look at this example here in Marin County, leveraging the Uber app and putting their services into Uber's application. These types of things, as mobility as a service, has been a starting point. But these third-party experiences are becoming more common, where the line is and the barriers are coming down, just to engage the constituents with the apps that they use where they are. Next slide. All right. We've also seen, hold on, we're going the wrong way here. All right, there we go. We've seen and talked about this, and for those of you that were with us yesterday, a cashless and contactless experience, right? Even curbside service in government. I know at many of the virtual digital government summits, and talking about how many of you are delivering IT support during the pandemic, you were offering curbside service to your employees, but this is becoming the default, right? The pandemic has ushered in this new era of contactless services. It's accelerated the use of digital services in government. And much of this isn't going away. I think there was a comment yesterday that before, waiting in line was seen as inconvenient, but now there's also a safety aspect to it. In fact, how many of you got anxiety when you saw Dustin's slide there about the mass audience with all those people at a concert? I mean, that seems like something that was years ago where that might feel safe, but it's all about accessibility now and breaking down those barriers through a contactless and even a cashless experience that will be in government. Next slide. Now, the open question I think that we'll hopefully get to a little bit today is, will COVID-19, will the pandemic break down some of these long-term barriers, right? Whether it was, hey, our employees can't go remote. We can't do video videos in City Hall things by video. We're starting to see those barriers be temporarily removed, but we must sit here today and anticipate that these are going to be things that are not coming back. Cashless, contactless, video, all of these trends now have taken deep root in government and will break down barriers that will allow us to serve more and a broader constituency. Next slide. Now, I just spoke briefly about video, but the last 12 months, and you've seen this from probably data that Dustin and I presented over and over again, video consumption is through the roof. I mean, we're saying that when we sit here on Zoom, every webinar, every event is virtual. And you can see that on the right-hand side, right? 96% of consumers say that they're consuming more media than they were before the pandemic. And whether that's watching, whether that's streaming, whether that's attending virtual events, I think that's true. But it's now standing out as a preferred delivery model to engaging with government as well. Now, the one thing that we looked at kind of pre-pandemic and now in the middle of the pandemic is trust, right? And I think when we talk about contactless services and citizen engagement, we're also starting to see that it's having a positive impact. Look at the rise in trust in government. And to pull the onion back a little bit further, it's actually an increase in trust in state and local government. Federal government didn't fare as well over the past year. That may change, but we are seeing an increase in trust overall in government. The new normal. Dustin and I presented this slide at length, so I won't walk you through all 8 attributes here today, but these are the 8 attributes that we believe will dominate the agenda for the remainder of this year and probably into early next year. They reflect an alignment with our CIO priorities through our national benchmark surveys and our research. And it aligns to much of the topics over the last 2 days, whether that's cybersecurity, remote work, workforce, and of course, budget and cost control. Next slide.
As we said, connectivity is a vital, important thing right now.
All right, perfect. So when we look at these priority lists, whether it's the city and county ones, there's a lot of commonality across these top 10 priority lists, right? Cybersecurity didn't go anywhere, didn't move up, it didn't move down. It stayed as the number 1 overall priority. In fact, even in our state list, we saw a number 1 state retain that. What move up? Budget and cost control. We saw this a decade ago too, during the previous recession. We saw budget and cost control rapidly move up the list and retain its spot. But we look at those same CIO priorities. We saw infrastructure modernization and process automation. We saw all of these things kind of push up that align to those 8 attributes that we saw earlier. All right, now we're going to take a deep dive into what's next and some of the key trends.
Yeah, there's lots of exciting trends that are taking place. And as Joe talked about, you've all done tremendous work in response to the pandemic and kind of, pivoting and reimagining the way services are delivered. And now we want to look at what are some of the macro trends that we're watching through the CDG, one being this notion of government to the edge. So imagine, the need to buy a shed and the ability to, deal with the permitting process as a part of the edge of that experience, to really take that onto the consumer portals and to bring government closer to where people are. So an edgeless government is something that is emerging and we're tracking very closely.
Then you look at the hybrid work. I mean, look at the aspects we saw. Every topic session, even yesterday in the modernization panel, it kind of came back to remote work. And this is a survey done here that hits on how much of your work can be done without productivity loss. And you can see in government, it's just a little over 30%. So we believe that hybrid work will become the default model.
Absolutely. And then when you look at, how this is applied to processes in government, right now, government has feedback loops. Normally those feedback loops are only when legally required. But what we see emerging is the need to start to have predictive and behavioral feedback loops that are real time, that are built into every experience as a part of that experience. So if someone is filling out a form for service, instead of them reaching the end of that form and hearing that, oh, this is the wrong form, or having a human tied up and actually reviewing that, having that built into the process where you can start to leverage the information that they already entered and provide that as a basis of saying, hey, here's the right form to fill out. And oh, we've already pre-populated it with that. That's providing a positive and a real-time feedback loop that's beneficial and that reduces the amount of duplication or repetitive data entry that may exist.
I think one of the big areas that we've been focusing on is obviously identity, right? That ties into a number of other trends that we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of privacy, in terms of data ownership. And you can see the reference here to GDPR, but the idea is that identity is such it's one of these big, massive projects that government's going to take on because it does break down some of the barriers in terms of citizen services and the friction that exists across a number of government levels and government services.
And we know identity is the killer app that's going to enable a lot of the use cases we talked about. And a part of that is also going to be leveraging APIs. So really looking at, not just APIs for services that exist, but think about the knowledge that government has. What if that knowledge was accessible in a query, just like you could query Wikipedia based on Siri and a variety of other engines? What if you could go and start to figure out what services were available, what laws were available, what data was available, all through whatever consumer engine you're using as a basis of doing that? We think that future is not only being built now, but it's something that will enable an experience that doesn't require everyone to have their own app. It will just require everyone to build the right plumbing.
All right, the next macro trend here is humanized AI interactions. Earlier, we talked about how these chatbots are continuing to evolve. The next evolution may be a little bit more personalized, but still heavily geared by AI. You may have seen this video from us in the past, but these are all AI-generated chatbots. These are not real people, but they have the look and the feel of real individuals, and that very well may be the next engagement point of citizen services in government.
Absolutely. The humanized Siri in your pocket. Now, on top of that, we talked about connectivity at the beginning. We know ubiquitous connectivity is also going to be a key part of the future. I mean, when you think about people at home in the next decade having a terabyte internet connection down, that is going to enable all kinds of use cases that we can't begin to imagine, but it's also going to create a lot of new security vulnerabilities. When you think about a lot of the infrastructure attacks on the internet and on a lot of critical infrastructure in government has been from weak consumer IoT. Well, what happens when weak consumer IoT has a 1 terabyte internet connection down, and who knows what the upload is? You're going to start to see some more powerful botnets emerge. So security at the city level, at the citizen level, is going to be an important part of this.
All right, and the next piece is, Dustin and I were just talking about this morning, is the death maybe of the standalone app. And the integration of those apps into API marketplaces. And that can have tremendous impact for those of you on the industry side to build these connections to your services and with government through API.
Yeah, lots of exciting things there. Again, the plumbing of government. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the emerging challenges. And as Phil called out in the chat here, identity is going to be a key part of this. So we'll kind of dive into some of the main things that are on our radar. And I think we'll start first with one that is very close to many of you, and that's the emerging regulatory landscape that's happening. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of algorithmic regulation at the local level of government, both from a predictive policing standpoint to the use of AI, to how to take bias out of algorithmic bail, all kinds of things that are emerging here. And it's a very fragmented landscape that kind of varies city by city. So something that you want to pay very close attention to and also be part of those conversations as they go forward.
Yeah, I hinted at this earlier. When you look at those things, you also have to look at data privacy. And this isn't something that fell off the radar with the pandemic. In fact, our team just went and looked at a bunch of enacted laws and proposed laws. And there is a massive uptick in terms of data privacy and data security legislation out there about enacting reasonable security across government programs.
Absolutely. And, Rob Lloyd talked about this at the beginning when he recapped day one. The equity and inclusion aspect of GovTech is going to be even more vital than ever. And so focusing on how to standardize this and bake this into the experiences that we create, to allow people to participate in a form that is inclusive and equitable to them is going to be a key part of this. So definitely a major dynamic that agencies are going to be paying attention to, and one that we're seeing even some positions, as you see here in Baltimore, are starting to emerge.
All right. I think we heard about this at the beginning too. We know that these stimulus funds are absolutely flowing, right? We've seen billions and billions of dollars flow out to government and into education. The question is, are we actually ready? We talked yesterday, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit today, in terms of, do we have the capacity to meet this moment in time and navigate all of the technical debt, the modernization, and the big picture issues to not miss this. I think it was crisis of opportunity, as Ed said at the very beginning.
And I just want to call out that I think Rob called us out in the chat to not have separate positions that are dedicated to equity and inclusion there. So thanks, Rob, for sharing your thoughts on that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the foundational elements of this. So we kind of gave you a look at the now. We talked about what's important, what's on the radar. Now we want to look at what are some of the characteristics of local government agencies that are embracing some of this change, that have adaptable foundations, both from an infrastructure standpoint, from kind of the human layer, the people aspect, and then looking at it from an intelligence standpoint. What are those three kind of macro attributes of a city? Well, let's start first with kind of the foundational infrastructure layer. And as we know, infrastructure and the plumbing of all of this is key to, your ability to adapt. Agencies that rapidly adapted during the pandemic had in place scalable foundations. They had scalable infrastructure, whether it was a hybrid-based infrastructure, they had in place something that was elastic that could expand to the needs. But I think one other key thing that often gets left out of the conversation that's important is they also had an agile governance structure. They had the ability to go outside of the norm and find ways to rapidly adapt. Now, we know there also are legacy technology challenges. I mean, there's still systems that look like this, unfortunately, in government. And, there's a lot of opportunity here to find ways to, deal with some of these legacy systems, to take hybrid approaches that allow them to extract value of what you've got and to put put more systems in place that leverage that. And that kind of gets into the next pillar of this, which is around leveraging the connected devices that you have today. So when you think about smart cities, one of the challenges with local government agencies that have tried smart cities approaches that have been capital intensive, it's because they've gone out and deployed a lot of new technology. We know that a key pillar of adaptability is going to be leveraging what you have and making sure that you've got the ability to tap into that infrastructure and to put it to use to find some additional use cases on top of it. We know when you do that and you have that scalable foundation, you are leveraging your internet connected devices at the edge of your organization, then you can start to extract, data and insights that you can put public. And so open data will be a key part of this, not just for the citizen engagement aspect, because we know that a smaller set of the citizen populations will access that data on a regular basis. But you have to leverage the dog fooding principle. You want to build something that can be used by your own teams and by the public. And so, you want to find ways to put that data to use so that way you, in essence, eat your own dog food, as you say in Silicon Valley. Now, a key part of bringing intelligence to the data is through context and through data standardization. And this is kind of one of the missing pillars right now that some of you are trying to tackle, but it's one thing that has to be dealt with all the way down to the procurement level of government, which is kind of a form of infrastructure in itself. And that is standardizing how we store data and starting to build ontologies and data standards that can be used to bring intelligence, not just to your community, but based on how your community is able to interpret signals and analysis from other communities of similar size per capita. Then you start to get into some really interesting elements. So I'll let Joe talk about the human aspect of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at people, we talked about this obviously a little bit earlier, but scalable and portable identity. It's not going to be too far off where your the thing you carry around that proves your driver's license. There's obviously some ongoing discussion, very politicized, around the vaccine passports as well. But the idea that you can have a digital wallet that contains all of the key elements in terms of your interaction points with government. And that all brings us back to this notion about whatever it was, Dustin, how many years ago with the rise of the Government Experience Awards. But this notion of creating this customer-centered experience or resident-focused experience that connects all of the layers that we've talked about, the applications, the infrastructure, of course, the experience layer, all connecting back to our engagement points with government, whether we're an employee, business, or citizen. Then we look at this other piece, and we've talked about this, I think it was two years ago. We started to see it kind of creep into some RFPs and government contracts, but the rise of this on-demand and hybrid labor. We've seen it in kind of the easier parts, maybe around design work and aspects around kind of getting logos built and some branding aspects. But now we're starting to see it creep into other more critical areas of government services. So this may be something to look out for in the future as well. And that means going back to the 8 attributes of what we think is on the horizon, looking at not only our people and training, but looking at our organizational models as well. And what does that mean in terms of the future of work, the future of our organization in this new distributed environment?
Absolutely. So now let's talk a little bit about how this impacts the intelligence layer of your local government agencies and how you can extract value there. We'll start first with kind of expanding on the data conversation. Leveraging third-party data is a key pillar here because, agencies are only as smart as the data that they have and can contextualize on top of that. So finding ways to tap into other external data sets is going to be a key pillar. Now, you already do it with transportation, but we need to find ways to actually extend that to other jurisdictions, regional planning authorities, other types of things. Think about the nature of how we plan, large scale infrastructure in government. Everything has changed behaviorally. So we have to start to think about how do we embrace third-party data standards and data sets as an aspect of how we make better decisions as it relates to infrastructure. Now, we know a key part of all of that is also around how we evaluate whether or not we're successful in that. And so we know performance metrics have been a major part of this whole process and evolution of government, as we've seen dashboards emerge and public accountability standards and transparent KPIs and other things. So how do we actually take that and leverage that with more mission critical applications in government? We saw performance, metrics and measures in essence emerge as a mission critical dynamic during the pandemic, because you saw dashboards like this that showed you where you're at with recovery, showed you case count, showed you all of that. Many of us were glued to the Johns Hopkins dashboard. So, finding ways to take that same level of utilization that we had for public health and apply it to a variety of other signals inside of our communities is going to be important. Now, part of that is also making sure that we're able to contextualize and personalize experiences based on the users. This is a common practice with GIS data because you can get into, showing a user an experience based on their location, based on, the context of what they're looking at. But when you think about other government services, how do we personalize it based on the signals that we have on them? Are they past due on a water bill? Are they there to pay their taxes? There's certain things that we can anticipate that we can show them kind of to that Amazon-esque experience. So we have to find ways to do that, but we have to do it in a way that balances the privacy conversations that Joe was talking about. So we have to look for opportunities to anticipate, to personalize, to delight, but not to overwhelm or to get into an area where we're using their data in a way that's uncomfortable. Part of this experience also has to evolve into feedback loops and extracting intelligence from every process that exists in government. There are lots of feedback loops that can be automated within the process of any type of service that you're delivering, whether it's a negative feedback loop or a positive. Today, we think about feedback loops as active participation. Like I call 311, I'm closing a feedback loop. Normally it's a negative one because I'm calling to get something handled. But what about after they complete a permit process? What if we ask them, hey, how was the experience? What would you do better? How can we improve this experience? What if we started to find ways to do that and also leverage the data at each point in that process to better understand where they're at, where they're getting caught up, and how we can further optimize that. And this also gets us to, this theme of government as an experience or an API. So Joe talked about the experience layer of government. The key there is abstracting complexity from the process. We focused on infrastructure modernization. We got into applications. Now you're seeing best of breed applications delivered at the edge. The next step is really to start to get into this experience layer where you abstract complexity. You get away from creating the Yahoo websites of the past where every possible thing is imaginable is available if you can find it. And you start to focus on how do I deliver the right service to the right person at the right time? And that's where we see incredible opportunity to really streamline and take the government experience from just being omni-channel and just being on multiple platforms to really being personalized and contextual to the individuals that we're trying to serve. And so much opportunity there for us as we go forward in the public sector. And so, where we go from here, there's so much guidance. I know there were some conversations about this yesterday. There's not a silver bullet to how you keep up with the future, but one of the first steps is just knowing where the world is headed. And so we hope that this has kind of given you a little bit of a fire hose of that. And you want to start to look at anticipating the future, not just to be disrupted by it, but you want to find ways to look at some of these bigger macro trends and how they're going to impact you. We've also seen there's no longer a government track of technology adoption and a consumer and a business track. They're all converged. We are all on an exponential cycle of technology adoption. And so we have to start to find ways to leverage those dynamics and to apply them in the way that we make our technology investments. You can't do it alone, so you have to really look at collaborations. I mean, we've seen really the reemergence of the P3 model in response to the pandemic. This is something that's going to be more important than ever as you start to navigate periods of uncertainty. A lot of our industry partners that are on here that you're working with day in and day out are going to be a key part of helping you navigate that change, as well as other agencies, NGOs, other types of things. So what is that new P3 model? We think that's something that's emerging right now. And then you want to make sure that you lay the foundation with, an adaptable infrastructure and governance process. So, this means you have to focus not just on the tech and the processes, but the policy itself as well. And you want to make sure that you don't box yourself into a position where you are too slow to respond or react to behavioral changes or societal changes. You want to make sure that you can do it very, very quickly. Joe, any thoughts on this one as well?
I mean, I would come back to what Renee mentioned yesterday on that collaboration piece, right? And I think Ed hit on it too, is find the allies. Find the allies in your organization, in your jurisdiction. Right now, with all the federal funds, there's still competing priorities on how to use those funds. So building those allies can certainly make sure that innovation surge doesn't have to end, both with federal funding or even with the pandemic.
So what we wanted to do for the rest of our time is really just save some time to open the floor to a discussion. I mean, Joe and I have been in the trenches of tracking a lot of these trends with our team, looking at the future, looking at what's happening in the market. So we'd love to just open the floor to everyone to get any thoughts, comments, what you're doing. There have been some questions related to getting a copy of the deck. We will absolutely send a copy of the deck out to everyone as well. So don't worry about that. We'll make sure that you get that. I'm going to stop sharing now, so that way we all have an opportunity to see each other. And I think Tom has the first question. So Tom, we're going to unmute you and then give you the chance to ask your question live. There you go.
Thanks, Dustin. My question is about leapfrogging technology. One of the sort of challenges that we faced as a large entity that frankly was pretty far behind the technology curve not that long ago was that I feel like we've made a lot of progress in the last, say, 7 or 8 years, but it's really been foundational. And to leverage some of sort of the really exciting new technologies that I've heard you and Joe speak to, I wonder if there's a way to get there faster, or if I have to sort of go through the long, slow, methodical slog to kind of get to that pinnacle. This is a concept that I've spoken about with Terry in the past as well. In terms of the way that digital communities is viewed, it tends to always be looking for sort of the cutting edge or near cutting edge technologies. So I imagine we're not alone in that we're behind the curve trying to catch up. I'm just wondering, maybe there's some strategies to get there faster that I haven't seen. I'd love thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, the reality is many of us have existing systems and legacy systems that we are working with that we have to, migrate into these newer environments that allow us to do more with them. So, looking at both that migration challenge, the cost of doing so, the investment that's required is a key part of that. So I think foundationally, there's a lot of, tackling that has to be done there, even when it comes to conditioning boards to understand technology investment, right? The days of the one-off, large scale projects, where it's a one and done type thing and you're good for a little while, that's over. So getting that, I think baked into the mindset, the operating model, the governance structure, the DNA of the organization, I think is a key part. In terms of opportunities to leapfrog, I think there are some. It just depends on the technology and kind of where you're coming from with it. I mean, you look at VoIP technology in some of the rural areas overseas, right? They just skipped analog lines altogether, went straight to internet-based telephony, and you had that whole dynamic where they were able to leapfrog because there wasn't a capital investment that they had to work with, undo. There also weren't regulations in place that restricted their ability to do that. And I think some of these technologies are kind of in that gray area from a regulatory standpoint. So we've got a lot to work with there. So I would say it just depends on the tech. It should be something that, when you look at where the end is and kind of where you're anticipating the future to be, maybe that's where we can start to look at how do we reverse engineer that and go backwards? What are those steps? And if you do have this, what do you need to do in order to make that jump? Are there ways to fast track that? Are there funding models that are going to allow us to do that as well? Joe, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think part of it, you hit the nail on the head. It's the framework, right? What are the jumps and where are the opportunities, maybe where you can make those double jumps where you need to. And I think part of that where we're seeing it, and the pandemic's done some of that, is on the citizen facing services. Right. Now, to the point in the presentation too, we've seen some fragmentation because some of those jumps haven't been well coordinated in a lot of places, but that's been a starting point.
Yeah, great question, Tom. And just a reminder, if you've got questions, use the virtual hand raise feature and we'll call on you. You'll get a request to unmute and then you'll be able to ask your question live. So other questions or thoughts from the group here? All right, Walter. We're going to send you a request to unmute. There you go. Can
you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Thank you for the opportunity and the presentation. I guess this reminds me of the old question about the chicken or the egg. What comes first? What's needed first? And I'm completely biased here, but I think a lot of this stems on the infrastructure needed to facilitate a lot of the change that you're talking about. When you start talking about personal identity, you immediately start talking about security, private networking. How do you make the customer, the consumer, the citizen feel safe with all their data? So I guess a lot of it stems around, do you have the infrastructure and the security in place to accommodate those concerns? So rather than wait for the need to implement the infrastructure, much like when fiber came along, everybody said, do we need gig connectivity? Are we ever going to get to that? Do we ever need 10 gig connectivity? Are we ever going to use that? Once you put it in place, people find the way to use it. So if you install the security measures and the network capability to start sharing information on a duplex nature with all of your citizens, with the community in general, with the neighboring communities, with all your government agencies, I guarantee you, at least my experience has shown that they will start using it. They'll take advantage of the capacity of the security that's available. Things will happen. So again, both of them are sort of necessities, but having the infrastructure in place sure is the leapfrog that, sort of helps the situation.
Yeah, I think you're right. Having that foundation, the foundation is what everything gets built upon. And I think you're right. If you build it, they'll they'll use it. There seems to be a never-ending thirst for things like connectivity, bandwidth, and all things.
Yeah, I think it's, we've seen it back to the basics, even in light of those agencies that weren't able to weather the pandemic as well as others. It was all back to the foundational elements of what they had in place with business continuity, disaster recovery, those types of things. I think, infrastructure is a big piece. I think connectivity plays into that. I think identity is also kind of the killer app. We know it's a complex thing to tackle, but it's going to be an important part of that foundational infrastructure. The regulatory environment is kind of wrapped into that. But I think the one thing that has shifted is we've often thought of that infrastructure as something that lives inside of a government building or a government domain, but the edge of government has evolved. So now we have to think broader about the infrastructure, even if it's not it's in your service area, right? Thinking about community-based cybersecurity and the work that's being done. I know, Rob is doing a lot of this work. There's a lot of work happening in New York on this, but finding ways to also acknowledge that the infrastructure edge is a moving target. And we have to start to think broader, even about things that are not in our direct control. That's kind of a new dynamic and a new skill that agencies have to start to figure out how to interface with that. So great question.
And Rob just solved the whole chicken and egg comment there in the chat. So for those interested, argument is settled in the chat.
There we go. All right, I think Kim was next.
Hey, thanks everybody. And for our presenters or anybody else on the call, one of the things I'm curious about, based on conversations I have, I think people clearly understand after what we've been through that digital identity is more important than ever. If we're really going to have a resilient way to provide citizen services, constituent services. My question is, maybe it's twofold. One is, we heard yesterday, people are really optimistic about funding coming down to help in a number of areas based on some of the federal legislation that's been passed. Do you think you can use that funding to build out the necessary infrastructure for digital services and particular identity? And then maybe a second question is, what are the big hurdles today in terms of building out a digital identity? It was sort of distressing to see the news this week that 16 years after Real ID was passed, DHS just had to extend the deadline again. 16 years. So what's the prospect for digital identity, given the fact we still have states that can't even implement Real ID 15 years or 16 years later?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So on the funding front, I think, we're very optimistic about that as well. I think there is going to be a great opportunity to leverage that. I think there's some broad terms that have been used today, especially like in relation to the American Rescue Plan Act, where it's infrastructure for broadband, sewer, and kind of water infrastructure, but like the specifics guidance on how that can be fully leveraged, I think is one of those things that we'll have to probably wait on additional clarifications. I know Joe and Alan and others have been tracking that really closely, so I'll let them weigh in on that. In terms of kind of the identity problem, I think, there's so much, as Real ID is a good example of the challenge with solving identity. And I think you've got, the federal government's role in it in creating the standards, the state's role in that, and kind of, not always recognizing that standard or sometimes wanting to do their own. And then you've got, the local dynamic too, where you have some local agencies that have created their own identity for, homeless people and others to try to help lift them out of poverty. So you've got, everyone approaching this a little bit differently. I think, what we're also seeing on the consumer side is there's a decentralization that's happening as well, where more and more control of identity and identity related data is starting to get back into the hands of consumers. We've seen legislation in California and other states that have proposed the notion of users being able to monetize those data streams as well. So I guess to answer your question there, it's a very fragmented landscape, but it is one that we're seeing a lot of innovation in as well. And I think, I would look to, even what happened with GDPR and how that created a ripple effect for privacy legislation across the US. We know data brokerage models are now happening overseas in the EU, where they're looking at passing more of that control and direct monetization over to consumers. So we expect to see more of that start to happen. I would argue that eventually the feds will come in and start to connect the dots on some of this legislation that's happening at the state level. Whether or not it kind of becomes a US equivalent of GDPR, a scaled down version of that remains to be seen. But we do see identity as something that's, right now fragmented, very proprietary, but it is going to enable some amazing use cases when it's tackled. And the decentralization may happen whether the entities that are at play want it or not, as more of that is passed over to the consumers. Joe, I don't know if you've got anything else to add on the funding dynamic or the identity side. We could talk about identity for a long time.
Yeah, identity. I mean, it's 31 different flavors, right? Depending on where you live. I think hopefully we'll see some kind of synergies there across the states. On the funding side, I think it's right. We're still waiting for some guidance on some of the American Rescue Plan, the big buckets, right? Whether that's the state unemployment potential grants for modernization to even more prescriptive uses of those relief funds. I know many of you have talked about how you anticipate to use them, but we kind of want to see the full guidance to understand if there's any gotchas or strings attached to what really can and can't be used for.
Yep. Jerry, we'll unmute you and give you the chance to ask your question. There we go.
Thanks, Dustin. Thanks, Joe. So a couple things you said resonated with me. Trust in government, right? And then also bringing technologies to the community. And one of the things leading the digital services for San Jose, there's the skill up and the business process reengineering that we have to do internally, but then there's also what does that virtual city hall look like to our community? How do we refresh our approach to community engagement? And what does that have to do? And how do you reinvent yourself in a way that actually improves equity? And I'm not sure how much trend analysis or research you've done in that effort. We know that participation has went up in government, which is a great thing, but how does that balance out with the populations that haven't participated in government or had the luxury to do so much in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I haven't done.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was say we haven't looked at it from the city hall necessary lens, but we certainly did a larger national survey just a couple months ago on just citizen interactions with local government. I mean, the key takeaway is that local government services today were probably built for those that are 55 and up. As you started breaking it down by demographic, there were lower levels of satisfaction and lower levels of use. I can get you the findings from that, so you can take a look at all of the questions, but that was kind of one of the big takeaways.
Yeah, and I would say that, we definitely saw some of the other demographic bands start to engage with government that hadn't before. But again, government, as Joe was talking about, we've built services for people to come to those services, right? It's kind of a little bit of a monopolistic approach because they have to come to your portal to get water, to pay taxes, to do those types of things. I think the shift that's happening now is this human-centric approach and the ability to reimagine what citizen engagement is. And I would argue that's, starting to evolve even from the website now closer to where citizens are. You can start to leverage technology to identify what people care about, what they're interested in, what their sentiment is, how they feel on issues without requiring that they go to a specific place at a specific time to do a specific input on that. And I think, it's a balancing act though, too, because you don't want to just create digital channels that leverage the digital exhaust of people to do that, because then you aren't inclusive and you have to find ways to tap into data streams that are offline and that represent the full set of the population. So, I think it's definitely an area that a lot of agencies are focusing on now. I think a lot of companies are also looking at what is engagement now, right? As trust has gone up, so have the expectations that people have for the public sector. So they're going to start to look at that more. But I would say looking for edgeless ways to go to where your people are, both online and offline, ways to capture structured and unstructured data and to bring that into a single place to allow you to make a better analysis of the issue that's at hand. I would say those are kind of some starting points that may help you get into kind of the engagement side of things as well. All right, Mike, we're going to send you a request to unmute and then we'll let you ask your question. All right, I think you're live.
I think I'm live. All right. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, my question is really around that inclusivity piece. It's really around that transformation to the whole population, right? It's one thing for to look at an Amazon model, for example, where, for 20% of the effort, I can reach 80% of the population, right? It's the 80-20 rule. And when you're in a business, it's great if you've got 80% market share, right? But as a government, one of the big challenges we have is dealing with that last 20% who may be geographically challenged, may be challenged from affordability standpoint, maybe challenged from an education standpoint or a language standpoint. And it's really getting to the point where you have to customize for every individual. And a classic example, that's the quote digital divide or broadband issue that everybody is working on. Again, we have in Oakland County, we've in theory have 95% coverage of broadband, but that means we've got 100,000 people that don't have access. And trying to get 100,000 people to 100,000 individuals is a really big challenge compared to the 90% coverage that we already have. So those, I think, are, that whether it's digital divide or it's the, citizen engagement kind of functions, if they can't get their tablet connected to the Wi-Fi because they don't understand, what to us seem like simple networking concepts, but their tablet's not working or it's not stable or whatever the case, there are a lot of challenges related to that last 20%. And I'm just wondering if there are, data or strategies and lessons learned in those arenas as well.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that connectivity, homework gap, digital divide conversation is certainly a key pillar of the American Rescue Plan, right? Not just for the $10 billion infrastructure funds that Dustin mentioned, but the $7 billion of the Emergency Connectivity Fund that's out there for schools and libraries. But there's a big difference between coverage, like you mentioned, and adoption. And I think that we're also struggling with just that adoption piece. In many there, but the adoption figures are much lower. And that's a larger communication challenge that all education and government have.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, you're actually doing the first part of what you should be doing. You understand your audience, you understand your customer, and you understand where the gap is. And I think that's kind of the step one in the process, right? When you look at inclusivity and trying to build equity into the process, you have to look at the bigger picture of what you're working with and where those gaps exist, and then find strategies to start to bridge them. And government in kind of operating in an omni-channel way will have to build services and can't take away, different bridges that they build over time as well. So, unfortunately, we can't just steer everyone to digital interactions like you can in a private sector environment. We're going to have to make sure that we operate these channels differently. But I would say there's another opportunity there too when it comes to even the physical things that are in person. Technology can augment and amplify capability, right? We saw that firsthand with call centers during the pandemic, where you saw chatbots come in to augment, enable, and provide another mechanism to deal with clientele that were calling in. Now they had the ability to start to get some of that information or pre-qualify online, thus helping people that were offline have a better ability to get in touch with someone live. So I think thinking about those big picture business processes is going to be important, and it's going to be a moving target. And so, the advice I normally give agencies there is they constantly have to reevaluate who their customer is, the landscape their customers operating in, and the expectations that they have. And then they look at the gaps that exist or emerge from that so they know where to tackle. And rather than doing that once every time you do a strategic plan and you get it in a 3-ring binder from a really high dollar firm, you want to do it on an annual basis at minimum, so you understand who that audience is and how they're shifting. I mean, look at how much has changed just in the last, year, right? Everyone was on video, and then now everyone's tired of video, right? So you've got this dynamic where we have to really balance and look at those behaviors and how they're impacting people. Hey, Paul, good to see you. We're going to give you the ability to unmute yourself and ask your question too. All right, I think you're live.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep. We can hear you.
Perfect. So, hey, I'm Paul Hoppengardner, and I'm in Travis County. I'm the county executive for technology and operation. I'm dual hatted as the CIO. So I also have facilities and HR along with cyber risk and that portfolio. And in largest city is Austin, Texas, and Travis. So we've been involved in some regional activities related to vaccines. And I've had multiple hats in that sense of working through HR issues and facilities and trying to find locations. But I think what I've walked away with more than anything else is that the discussion of digital divide, the what people will call deserts for certain kinds of things. For example, we have what we call the Eastern Crescent, and there are no large grocery stores. There's no Walmart. There's no Walgreens. There's no CVS. Any of the places that you might have heard of naturally. And we started out operating large, along with the other entities, large places to come. And we're at the Circuit of the Americas track today, as an example. And 2 weeks ago, we were getting a couple of thousand, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 people a day through. Now our numbers are dropping down to below 1,000. And so I think the part that I would mention the most is that I think the CIOs are in particular good places to help connect the dots. As we begin to look and slice and dice the data and figure out who your market people are and where you have to strategize and how you have to take a look at who's in what zip code and how do you make that collaboration take place and what do you do to make sure that the technology is in place to help. I know all the way back to the VTOP grants back in 2008 that we were looking at. The federal grants today, I think, have the greatest chance for us to push down because the FCC has the dollars to pay for monthly service. And we've often found that in census tracts where you had the proper demographics, you also had 6 providers. The last mile wasn't the problem. There are places where the last mile is a problem, but more often it's the fact that somebody can't pay for it. And now we're working collaboratively across the region, attempting to, Harris County has an office of broadband. We're in the process of discussing forming one of those and partnering with the other people both, and there's a CIO group, both private and public, that's engaged in it. I think we have an opportunity of a lifetime to take that information and get services out to people and be able to make a difference that we haven't had in the past. And I challenge all of us to look at that very carefully, and particularly with the equity lens, because you're talking about what has really surfaced is the inequity in the delivery of medical care into so many parts of the community. And when we start taking a look at, there's a 7% uptake rate on vaccines, in the African American community, a 12% in the Asian, and a 50-something percent, in the other portions. And what that's telling us is that we're not reaching people, we're not convenient, we're having to go to them. And I think the use of GIS data, the use of slicing and dicing, coordinating with your healthcare districts and your hospital systems. We've been very fortunate literally since last March. All of the major hospital systems have been on a phone call. It was 7 days a week in the beginning, to where it's the hospital systems, the health authority, the local governments, all emergency management coordinating together and figuring out how we were going to, approach it. And the one thing, it's not always the best indicator, but Travis County was very fortunate that our per capita death rate was 79 compared to the state's average of 162. A lot of us think it's because of that coordination. And now as we start talking about how do we work in the digital equity piece, it's going back with places like community care, looking at their customer base and hopefully marketing to them to get their people devices. Because right now their telehealth is by the phone, literally old school phone. And if we can begin to get internet connectivity into that environment, we can also talk about pipelining for jobs and just all kinds of other things. So I think we've got some really good opportunities here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. As a Travis County resident, hats off to you and team, Paul, for all the work that y'all have done. So appreciate that.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you too. All right. So with that, I think we'll have to begin our wrap up here. So it's been great to have the opportunity to share kind of a fire hose of some of the macro trends that we're tracking on. I think we've been so inspired by the work that's been done by all of you that are assembled on this meeting today, both from the industry and the government side. And we also know, as Paul was just saying, we have an opportunity to kind of reimagine what's possible going forward. And, looking at some of those bigger picture trends, looking at where things are headed and looking at the foundational elements you have to have in place, but acknowledging the challenges and the risk and the financial aspects that we have to kind of mitigate in the process. we know that you're going to be successful. You've navigated, years worth of change in a matter of months. So we look forward to kind of watching your success as we go forward, and appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing as well?
No, this is a unique moment in time. I think we've covered that over the last 2 days. It seems with the injection of funds and the accelerant aspect of the pandemic, it's going to be fun to watch and continue to kind of get geeky and nerdy about this market, and watch very closely about the work that you all do in local government. So thank you for your participation today and allowing us to walk through this presentation. And thanks for the work that you continue to do to serve all of us as residents.
And with that, we will hand things back to Phil.
Dustin, Joe, as usual, fantastic. Great deal of information, and thank you for doing the Q&A with the audience. That was excellent. So thank you guys, appreciate it very much. So what we're going to do is we're going to get ready, but before we go to our break, we have 2 poll questions we want to do with the audience. So we're going to put the first poll question up, and it has to do with, when will you go to a local in-person technology industry event? So if you could take the poll, we'd appreciate that. And is it, I just attended one, July 2021, September 2021, November 2021, or 2022. And what we're trying to do is to gauge, what is happening out there and what's going on around the country in regard to your ability to go ahead and attend a live event. So we're going to let this go for a little longer. So I'm going to let you go for another 10 seconds or so. So everybody jump in.
And just to interject, Phil, we'll share this with you, and we will split this so that we can see industry versus government and report the findings, because there's different viewpoints nationally, by jurisdiction, and by company that we talk to.
Excellent, Alan. Thank you for that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to close this poll and share the results. So as we can see, 2022 was the leader, with September 2021 coming in second. So we're seeing a lot of fall 2021 into 2022 as the majority of the people that are going to attend live events. So we want to go ahead and put up our second poll question, if we could. When will you travel to a regional or national technology industry event? Again, I just attended one, July 2021, September 2021, November 2021, or 2022. So we'll go ahead and, this is, again, as Alan's saying, we'll be able to break this down based on everybody that answers the poll. And we'll look forward to everybody answering. People are answering a lot faster on the second one, Alan. So we're getting those answers in.
Yeah, we wanted to differentiate local versus where you had to get on a plane, most likely, or at least travel and stay the night somewhere else.
Excellent. We'll give it another 5 seconds or so. And let's go ahead and share the results. So again, 2022 is in the lead, and we see almost the same distribution of what was happening in the fall versus 2022. So thank you all very much for being part of the poll. We appreciate that. And what we'll do now, let me go ahead and, all right, we're getting ready to go to our short break now. So remember, yesterday we did a 5-minute break. We're getting ready to do that again. But right after the break, we're going to open our breakout sessions. So if you need to stretch or refresh what you're drinking, go ahead and do that. Make sure you stay logged in, because that way you don't get delayed when you try to come back in. It'll automatically transition you into your breakout. So let's go ahead and take that break, and we'll see you all back in 5 minutes.
Hi, Phil. Don't want you to be lonely there.
Hi, Alan. Terry's here too.
I'm here.
Hello, Terry.
Hi.
This is like our normal Friday call.
Exactly. So what should we talk about?
Let's talk about how important the entire government technology community is as we look at the future of our country.
You got that right.
That's a great philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
I wrestle with myself on this. It's so, we still have such an opportunity. As just hearing everybody over the last couple of days, I'm very inspired from the keynotes, from what Dustin and Joe shared, but also all the active discussions.
People that get things done are going to be so important to the future because
as they have always been.
Yeah, but even more so now, right? Coming out of everything that they learned through the pandemic, it's going to be important. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, many of us are of an age where we very much remember the first computers, and having grown up in Palo Alto, I definitely witnessed that in a really interesting way in elementary school, using the mainframe at Stanford to do math problems, and then Apple being down the street and Mr. Packard living around the corner. It's the transformation over my entire life has been truly staggering.
Well, we're almost close to starting back up. So another minute and we'll launch everything back again. So everybody come on back when you get a chance.
Looks like the Mix conference is going to be fun.
Yeah, I love the Mix conference.
Where is it going to be this year?
San Diego, it looks like. I got to figure out a way to get myself invited.
Yeah, same here.
It's a tough ticket. They're very exclusive.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. I know.
I like Rob. Did you see Rob's tag chat? You know people.
I got friends in the right places, huh?
That's right.
Right.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. It is almost time for our breakout sessions. Now, some of you will remain in the general session with me, and the rest will automatically be moved to assigned breakout sessions. I just want you to know we did have to make some adjustments based on some of the folks that couldn't be here today. So we moved some of the breakouts around. Trust me, they'll be great breakouts no matter where you end up, but we'll have great sessions. So we have some exciting sessions for you. We have a cybersecurity challenges in the next normal. That'll be Joe. We'll moderate that. We have collaboration in the future remote workplace. You get to stay with me for that one. And then the resurgence of shared services in government IT, and Terry Takai will be taking that session. So those will be great sessions. So make sure. Now, we only have 45 minutes in the breakout sessions. So we're going to keep it lively. We're going to keep it moving. So when you get called on, please keep your comments to about a minute or so. That'll make sure that we get everybody in to talk and that wants to have a comment and wants to take part in the discussion. Now, after the breakout sessions, you're going to be returned to the general session, or what we call the CIO roundtable. So and right at 45 minutes after they begin, you'll get a countdown in your breakout, except for my breakout. You'll just have to rely on me for the timing, and you'll automatically be returned to that general session. Now, to participate, please make sure you use the virtual hand raise. And that's your participants tab at the bottom of your screen. Please wait till we call on you to speak, and remember to unmute yourself. Now, if you raise your hand, don't lower it because you'll lose your place in line. So yes, so get ready for 45 minutes of excellent discussion. Now, we'll also have the chat function available in the breakouts, but the chats, we won't be monitoring those for questions as much, but you can use the chat. We want it to be lively, so make sure that you're communicating with each other, and we'll use the virtual hand raise to get you in. Now, one important thing, if you click the button to leave the room, you will only receive an option to leave the entire meeting. So whatever you do, don't click that button or we will lose you and then you have to log back in. Okay, it is now time for us to open our breakout rooms. Here we go. Everybody's coming in, getting everybody into the breakouts. All right. So with me, we have Zach Patton. Zach's going to be here helping us manage the entire workflow for the breakout. But I want to welcome you all, and it's great to see you all today for our breakout session. I hope you're having a great day too. I know that day one was a lot of fun. So again, we can use the chat feature all you want. So make sure if you have something you'd like to share, if you need assistance, make sure that you chat with our CDG help desk. They'll help you. To ask questions, again, virtual hand raise if you could. And whatever you do, don't leave the room. That's a bad thing. All right, so here's our topic for today. We know that collaboration is important. We know it's important internal to the organizations, and we know it's important external to the organizations. So what we want to explore is how CIOs are going to manage collaboration in the new hybrid remote workplace, and whether your leadership team is ready for that. So when you think about the topic, it's all about collaboration, both internal and external. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to welcome in Dave Ettinger. Dave, how are you today?
Hey, good. How you doing, Phil?
Great to see you. Thanks for being here. And it's exciting to talk about this topic. But Dave, I want to throw a question to you to get everything started if I could. So many people miss the days when you could get up and walk around and you could go around and see each other. And I'm sure a lot of the people on the teams miss that as well, the ability to collaborate in person. How are you managing this collaboration need that has to take place, especially in this new type of environment? And how are you being successful with it?
Yeah, it's been hit or miss for us over the last 13 months or so, but we have found some things that don't work, which is helpful to learn, as well as some things that are working well. Where I'm seeing it really break down in particular is across divisions. So we have an apps division, we have an infrastructure and ops division, and the communication that would occur informally between those two divisions has really suffered over the last 13 months, just because there aren't a lot of natural places where they would come together in the way that they would informally before. It's even made us think, to the extent we go back to the office, we might want to move around some of the chairs and try to mix apps and ops back to get, together more. But what we found in the virtual environment, which I think is more likely the future, at least in a very hybrid sort of state, works, is a couple of things. One, we have shortened meetings a lot. So there's a lot of research out there that talks about how back-to-back meetings are really bad for folks in a number of ways. Personal and sort of professional folks don't have a time to write down their takeaways, figure out what they're supposed to do from the meeting and that kind of thing. And so this new Outlook feature that's out there where you can automatically default your meetings to end, 15 minutes or 10 minutes before the end of the regularly scheduled meeting time is going a long ways towards creating that space for folks. And we're just implementing that kind of like a college campus would across the entire organization, including technology services. And the other thing that's been really nice, I'm surprised by this, is what we're calling tech talks. And we're going to be expanding this a lot, but tech talks in technology services in Denver is just a TED talk that we have facilitated by somebody in the organization, usually an individual contributor, about any subject at all. So the one we did last Friday at lunch, was on sustainability and this term, global weirding. And we presented a couple, the guy running it was Dan Burke. He's great architect for us, but not necessarily in a leadership position. Formally, it's a subject he cares about, and he facilitated that. He showed the tech talk and he facilitated the conversation. And what we did is we pushed people into breakout rooms and mixed people together who normally wouldn't get to see each other in the organization, would have no reason to be at a meeting together. And people love it. We're getting 60, 80 people at a time to participate in that. And we need to find more of those sort of water cooler type substitutes, not trying to make it like it was when it was physical, when we were all together physically, but taking advantage of the technology, in this case, breakout rooms and TED Talks, to find ways to mix people together so that they know each other, so they can pick up the Zoom call or the Teams call and connect with each other about something professional. And we're gonna really be increasing the frequency of that kind of stuff in combination with cutting down on the time people have to spend in meetings. And that means more, in addition to the Outlook feature I mentioned, that it involves better planning, better facilitation of meetings, that kind of thing, so that we don't spend our time there. And the last piece I'll mention is that sort of my analytics tool we're using to track how much time we're spending collaborating versus individually working. Really helpful for us. So those are some of the things we're doing.
Dave, thanks for sharing those. I appreciate that. Jerry, come on in from your perspective. What's happening? Are you managing that collaboration piece that needs to happen now?
So we actually thought we were going to start returning to normal about August of last year, and then the second wave hit, and then the third, et cetera. So we stood up something called Powered by People effort in conjunction with facilities and HR, and had 4 components to it. One was safe workplace. The second was health and wellness. The third was digital, drive to digital, and the fourth was effective teams. So the effective teams piece and the drive to digital was really hitting on what are we going to do to make sure that in this new virtual reality or hybrid reality that we skill up our employees and give them the ability to work differently. And so we then, as part of that, brought in learning labs, which are human-centered design approaches to actually solving problems, giving employees the skill sets to think and solve problems together. And our first challenge, we've done several of them now, but the very first one we did, we had 3 teams of 5 individuals of city employees, just from departments all over the city, solve a problem of what kind of platform is needed for the future to maximize employee engagement, to optimize productivity for our employees, and to optimize how we keep our employees informed. So in other words, we used to rely on the internet. Our old internet is behind VPN. That doesn't work very well in a virtual world. So how do we start thinking about new tools to actually increase productivity of our employees? And it was amazing what they came up with. I mean, they came up with something that I haven't seen yet, but it's a mashup of an LMS system and an internet and social media platforms.
Very cool.
But starting to come up with ideas about how we can work completely different in the city. And so we continue to engage those learning labs and have employees kind of helping solve our problems, including how do we think about city council memos differently and route and improve those. That was one of the last projects they worked on. And so really empowering and engaging employees at the center of our approach.
Jerry, thanks for sharing that. That's impressive. Thanks for all that great work. So what I want to do is, Janae, come on in from the private sector side. Are you finding it difficult to collaborate with your team and how that's impact your internal operations?
Yeah, well, thanks, Phil. Actually, much of our workforce, and again, Janae Newstat with SHI, much of our workforce has been remote. And so this transition to being remote isn't necessarily new for us. So we've kind of had to learn how to collaborate over time. It's just been a part of our institution. But of course, it has changed a little bit with the post-COVID era, if you will. And so we're doing things very similar to what David mentioned, like the tech talk and just open meetings where we have an opportunity for everybody to come together and just share. There isn't any specific agenda, but more so just sharing what's been successful, what's worked. And then because of that, and because of those sharing sessions, that's really led to a lot more collaboration as well.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? That whole ability to share like you're in person is very interesting. So thank you, Janae. Mike, Tim, I want to go to you next because that office looks a lot cleaner than when I used to occupy it. So what are you doing there, Mike? What's happening?
Well, I don't do a lot. That's why it's cleaner. And actually, I've got the camera angled so you can't see the mess. I'm actually kind of embarrassed by it. So, but a lot of the collaboration things. I mean, obviously, we're still very much working remote. And some of the initial comments that Dennis, I think, was making about how folks do need to have a little bit of face time and they need some break time from back-to-back meetings. I actually did set my default Outlook up so that it schedules 25-minute meetings instead of 30, or a 50-minute instead of 60 for myself personally, because I was running into some of that. But I think one of the areas where we have been challenged the most, and I think it's been a good thing for us to realize, there are absolutely some efficiencies. There's some really good things about people being able to be just heads down, uninterrupted, in their own kitchen, if they don't have, kids nagging them and, asking for peanut butter or whatever the case is. If they can work undistracted, they get a lot of work done. And we've seen productivity improve in many situations. But one of the big challenges we have is that obviously there are some technology situations, some things that we are doing for our customers that require a lot of complex integration and complex integration of multiple teams, especially technical teams, and some technology people aren't the best communicators, right? To not be able to be in front of a whiteboard, face to face in a conference room and kind of battle back and forth, with, what's the best network strategy or the best server tool or strategy, and, the security folks, and then the application people have to chime in, doing major incident troubleshooting or, major system design, complex system design. Those things are still very challenging with the tools that we are using. So that is an area that we're looking to really improve. There are tools that are available. They're still not quite as good as being there in person, but that is one area that for sure we're looking to improve.
Excellent, Mike. Thanks for that, because the one piece is to have the policies and the procedures in place to collaborate. It's also important to have the right tools. I couldn't agree more. Beth Stegner, I want you to come in. So collaboration, are you able to do that effectively right now, or are there any tricks that you're using to get that done?
A lot of the ones that have been mentioned. So I've been a proponent of making meetings shorter, kind of a la the college schedule, for probably a couple years. And it's our downtown campus, we're over multiple buildings. And so it's funny, like they'll expect one meeting to end at 11 and for you to miraculously be 3 blocks down the street at 11 for the next meeting. And it just doesn't happen. And that just kind of stymies your day. So this has been a really easy thing to adjust that Microsoft setting. I think virtually we've been working well, but I ask our team to lead by example as IT, to be on camera as much as they can to set the example. But I still see a lot of our people that aren't doing that. And it's hard. I'm like, are you going to walk into a meeting room and like sit behind a chair or something? If you're not going to do that, turn your camera on. It doesn't matter how you're dressed, at least dress the top half of you. That's what I'd at least like to happen. But I still think that's a struggle. And as Mike mentioned, we're not the best communicators. I mean, there are good IT people that do their thing. And then you've got a bunch of IT people that have come from other walks of education and business. And I think bringing those two together really helps make a really robust IT department, because you can balance on each other's skills. But I see us continuing with this hybrid, and this has been my conference week. So we've had these. There was a Women in Government on Wednesday, and Gartner was Monday and Tuesday. And the Gartner one showed some awesome team stuff like whiteboarding and the ability to see people. But I know it's going to come not to the GCC section. And so I'm just going to be like, oh, we're going to wait another year or something for that to come, which is unfortunate and a little disheartening. So I would encourage anybody that's on GCC to push Microsoft to really bring us up as quickly as they can with the commercial. But I just look forward to some of those opportunities where we can be more efficient with our time and communicate a little more intention. I think what I miss too is when you don't see people, you don't see if they're paying attention or they're not paying attention, or maybe they have some sort of body language that says, I'm not really buying it. And you can't bring them into the conversation if you don't see that. Yep. And so you walk away and everybody thinks they're on the same page, but they're not. Another friend in another industry talked about they're starting policies, which I think are very interesting. And these were in-person policies too. But when a meeting ends, if you've got this hybrid where some people are in a room and some people are virtual, the virtual may drop off. Being mindful not to continue the meeting in person and you left half the people out of it. And they walk away with, yep, I heard this meeting and I heard everything, but yet there was still some stuff going on. And so being thoughtful for that into the future.
Yeah, Beth, that's so important. You know, that whole piece of leaving people out of communications, that's how miscommunications happen as well, if something was covered there. Shantae, you'd like to come in.
I do, and I'm coming in not on video to follow Beth. But the one thing I also want to bring up is, you know, we all have life also continuing. The one thing I was talking to a colleague before, I was like, how am I busier now than I ever was before we had the pandemic? I mean, I'm waking up at 7 and I'm on camera for sometimes 10 hours, 15 hours, you know, especially if we're really working on something. And so I think that's something that also we're at this point where I think we're all fatigued. You know, we got the kids running, you know, I'm sure Amazon at some point is going to show up and my dog's going to go crazy because they're going to leave a package and ring the doorbell, you know, and it's, how do you deal with also people that are more introverted? I mean, you know, Phil, you and I have done a couple sessions together, but I'm actually an introvert, shockingly enough, you know? And so it's like, how do you, I know you're shaking your head.
No way, no way.
But how do you engage the people who are more introverted, you know, and aren't used to having to forced to be on camera and so forth and so on. So I think that's one thing as leaders that we can all take a look at. So when we do go back in person, how do we take some of the skills that we developed when we were in the virtual world to also apply that to our new collaboration and our communication when we're no longer in a virtual environment?
Excellent points, Shantae. Thank you. Michael, you wanted to come in next.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting points by pretty much everybody. And one that certainly resonated, I think, is as a result of what we've seen, so many new channels of communication have now become the norm and expected. And some of that is completely information overload at times at any level. So you have, you know, Slack and Trello and MS Teams and email and all the others in between. And it's very difficult, I think, for folks to keep track of all that. Unless you're specifically tagged in some comments, you won't necessarily get those notifications. And so I think the pendulum has probably swung very deep in the other direction as a result of some of the trends that we've seen in the market from the pandemic. And hopefully you find some of the, you know, those points in the middle. But I think right now that's a big challenge for us and presumably other folks as well. And it also, you know, it kind of hinders into the ability to do some deep work, which is, you know, some of the comments that were made before, where now I can only do that sometimes on the weekends. And I am in the kitchen actually right now. And even so, without the dog barking in the background and the baby crying, it's very difficult to find that pocket of time just to get the most important deep work done, certainly during business hours. So hopefully that changes, but that is a challenge and struggle that we're constantly looking to find the right balance on.
You know, Michael, that's amazing because pets always show up or the kids go running by. And I think that's humanized a lot of what we do as well. Is we're in people's living rooms now where we never were before. I mean, I never thought I would see people's insides of their houses to the massive amount that we have. So Michael, thanks for sharing that. Jeff, you're in next. Jeff, there you are.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it really does humanize because we see people in a different context than we would in an office environment. So I think that's a really important feature that I actually appreciated, that you get to know people and who they really are. Much like others who in the room here have said, I mean, we've done things, you know, default to 25-minute meetings instead of 30, you know, default to 55 instead of 60. You know, those are easy things to put in place. Sometimes they're hard to cut the conversation off, especially if it's being really productive, but you know, sometimes it's just necessary to do that. And one of the things similar to what David, you mentioned about the tech talks, we're doing similar. We have a monthly, what we call a customer stakeholder group meeting. So we invite all of our different customers internally to come together. And then we have a roundtable discussion around different technology topics. So, you know, this past month we held one on what's our cloud strategy and how does that apply to the different applications that we have and support. So that's been really helpful, especially to collaborate and really have that continuum of customer engagement process internally with those that we do provide all this support for. So it's really been helpful for us to really keep that communication line open. The other thing that we've been really pushing and promoting is flexibility. especially with parents who have children trying to get and accommodate their needs in a virtual schoolroom environment. And, sometimes you're not going to work 8 to 5. It might be I work from 8 o'clock till 11:30, and I got to go off and take care of my kids. And then I come back at, at 2 o'clock and work till 7 o'clock, some things like that. So we're really promoting a lot of flexibility in people's schedules. So that's been very helpful.
Jeff, you think about that flexibility when you're able to do that. That's also the agility to do things as well from an organization perspective. So I love that because it doesn't need to always be done between 8:30 and 5. If they can do it at 2 in the morning, why can't they? Right? Excellent points. Andrew, you're in next. Welcome back. Good to see you, Andrew.
Hey, good to be here as always. So a couple observations. And I think one thing I have in common with Janae, other than our organizations work heavily together, but we were 75% virtual already. So for most of our team members, I was not. I was working at headquarters, and it was an adjustment for us, but everyone else kind of shrugged and said, welcome. We've all been doing this forever. And a couple of the tools that we've used, a non-technology tool was giving people the freedom and the confidence to block their calendars, as leaders, to say, listen, we're all getting sucked into meetings 24/7. It is not uncommon for me in my role to be in meetings back to back, where we basically suggested, and at least to my direct reports and theirs, block your calendars, just find time, take at least a full day. So you need 8 hours of block time at least on your calendar that's off limits to other people. And if you have to schedule around it, schedule around it. But that has been a big help. And at least it gives someone the choice whether to accept the meeting during that time or not. And so that's been something that's been helpful to get that mental airspace that people are looking for. The other thing I will say is I think we're having fewer unnecessary meetings than we did before. And I really think one of the key reasons we're able to do that is Teams. Some people use, we have warring factions. There is a Slack camp and a Teams camp. I am in the Teams camp, not because I have an affection for it more than Slack, but just the people I interact with are on Teams, where we can come to decisions very quickly with a couple lines of text. And so that's been good. We use the group chats a lot. Hey, what do you think about this? And it seems as though the meetings I'm in are more substantive, So those are two things that we've been doing here. The other thing I would say from a tool standpoint that has really helped is having a single space. We're in the project portfolio and service management software business, right? Well, what we have found to be really helpful, and it came into focus when we started needing to do it ourselves, was having one place where all the team's work is. And so when we're meeting as a team, whether it's, we have the concept of a card wall, but Trello is another example that I think Michael threw out there, where we can just say, here's what's going on. We're all on the same page, no matter what that type of work is. That's been tremendously helpful too.
Yeah, Andrew, I couldn't agree more. The ability to share things, because in the physical world, it was always, you just handed documents off or you work together. So that's an excellent point. What I want to do now is pivot a little bit, because we talked a lot about internal. I want to talk a little external. And I want to go to Tom with Riverside. Tom, come on in for a second. How have you been able to manage that whole collaboration piece externally?
Well, we've done it just like we're doing here. You get on, you talk, same as we've always done. We're just not doing it in the room. You still listen, you still try to be reasonable and accommodating. You try to collaborate. The same principles that we've always used, we just do it differently. I will say that one of the bonuses really has been the video component. 2 years ago, nobody did video. Very few did video. Today, it's the norm. And I appreciate that, because over the conference calls that we've all done ad nauseum, you don't get that body language. You don't get that sudden hit the mute button and go, are you effing kidding me? They're saying this again, and then unmute. Because we've all done it. We've all been on those calls. You don't get that type of interaction when everyone agrees to be on video for the conversation. And if someone's got an issue, hopefully those non-visual cues are coming through. And so I think overall that's been very good for regional collaboration outside the organization, and quite frankly, internally.
So it's not one of those where yes, we agree with everything you're talking about. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm a physical person as well. I always watch body language, and I'm very in tune to how people are reacting to things, because you can change your message too, Tom. I agree at that point. Thank you. Leah, do you want to come in? Leah Erickson, want to come in and talk a little bit about some external collaboration?
Sure. And sorry, I'm not on camera. I'm also on my phone. One of the things that I think was really cool that the city of Long Beach did is we created a digital engagement toolkit. And this is more a collaboration with the community versus like vendor partners. But we use the IAP2 spectrum to talk about the different type of technology tools that can be used when we're trying to do inform versus consult versus empower. So, and I previously provided you guys, I think, that toolkit, and I could send it to you guys again in a link if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, tools like Zoom are more community friendly. Teams is definitely more for internal use, and then of course use of video. In this case, in our case, we create videos and we broadcast them on our YouTube channel, and we have a TV channel as well, cable channel. All of that is part of our strategy. And we're trying to, but we also recognize the digital divide that was talked about a lot earlier. That's a factor. So this is just a complement in-person engagement that we hope will continue more robustly in the future.
Leah, thanks for sharing that. So I want to bring Kate. Kate, come on in, talk a little bit about external collaboration, and are you seeing it out in the space, and is it working well?
So from an external standpoint, one thing that strikes me as we talk about this, and this is maybe not exactly, Phil, where you wanted me to go with external collaboration, but before the pandemic, a lot of conversation was around how do we retain and keep quality employees and keep them excited in a career in government. And I work for a tech company. I'm the client director for ServiceNow. And we've seen that externally engaging potential prospects to come and work at our organization is really important, and really important for them to get a sense of the culture. So we're using a lot of different ways, short videos, storyboards, meetups, ways to keep people kind of engaged. And then that continues through the onboarding process. So I'm interested too in how our government partners are really maintaining both, retaining their employees, but that onboard experience, bringing them into the culture, keeping them excited and engaged.
So that's a great point. Tom, you had your hand up. Did you want to come in on that?
Well, I was just going to piggyback on something that Leah said, and that was about the collaboration. But I started focusing too much on, quite frankly, the current topic. So I'll let it go and I'll come back to it.
All right, Tom, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Zach in. Zach has another question that he wants to pose to the group. Zach, go for it.
Thanks, Phil. So I just listening to what some people are talking about, I'm curious about, are there aspects of this that have actually been an improvement over the way that your teams were collaborating prior to the pandemic? And we've heard some people talk about, the value of shorter meetings, even in person, or I think, David Ettinger talked about this has kind of shined a light on the need to have better kind of, even in the physical environment, kind of better cross collaboration. I just wonder if there are aspects of this that people have seen as kind of beneficial, or at least kind of exposing some of those elements that you might carry forward into the future. I don't know if like Kim Nelson, would you like to tackle that? Kim might be on mute. Kate McCulley, are you there? Would you like to join the conversation?
I definitely think that there's improvement around having a, a virtual workforce that's a captive audience for collaboration. Where I think that we have to hesitate a bit is the expectation that, sub 5-minute response time or quick decision making, because our days are so packed that if we're not giving our teams the ability to be thoughtful in response and make sure that we're modeling that type of behavior around really thinking through a decision, I think we take that positive, which is we have, we've lost commute time, we've lost travel time, we have more meetings, and we make that into a negative because we're making decisions too quickly without the element to hit the pause button.
Yeah. I see Dave's hand is raised. So let's hear from Dave, and then I'd like to go to Linda Ding.
Yeah, I thought that's an interesting question, Zach. And, there clearly have been some ways. I mean, the one I hear about all the time that people love is not standing over each other's monitors to look at the same thing on the same monitor, but being able to see so much better that which they're working on. I think as we are, for a lot of, and frankly, a lot of political reasons, sort of heading back to the office starting in about a month. And we technology services in Denver think about how to support that workforce as they move to this hybrid model. I think we are going to see potentially the loss of some of those key sort of advantages. And I think this hybrid model, for lack of a better word to call it, is actually going to be a lot tougher than the mostly remote model that we went to, 13 months ago. I think just the audio component of trying to run a hybrid meeting, you've got 15 people in the meeting and half of them are there in one room and the other half are remote. Getting the right technologies, things like Surface Hubs and those kinds of technologies, and the right Polycom setups, and all the process changes and norms, social norms we're going to have to do just to handle the audio portion of these meetings is going to be tough. We're seeing that mostly when we, one of the big advantages, we're getting a lot more participation in city council meetings than we ever did before. But they are very much in favor of making these hybrid. And so you've got this big cavernous chamber of a room, and we have to actually have a person sit at a device and click remote audio or in-person audio. It's the best thing we've been able to come up with so far. And that's their only job in that meeting is to toggle on and off the audio and the source of that audio. Because you can't expect the city council members to do it or the technology to figure it out. So at least we haven't figured out how to make the technology figure it out. So you get sort of some inefficiencies from this stuff as you move into this hybrid model. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for the rest of the year, because the Downtown Denver Partnership and all these other stakeholders, they want the people back downtown, and they're not going to go just to the, everybody can work remote kind of model.
It's such a good point that we're really kind of entering now into what feels like returning to normal is actually going to be challenging in new and different ways. I appreciate that. Linda Ding, are you there? Do you want to join the conversation?
Yeah, and a great question. And at Laserfish, during the pandemic this year and next year, we're really focusing on two key components, improving the communication and collaboration. The first is more external facing, more towards the underserved communities and the colors. The reason that we have seen so much inequality in their education and the big divide during the pandemic is their accessibility to the needed resources. So we're working with local agencies in the higher education and K-12, trying to bridge that digital gap. So how they can, when they're not showing up, in the local facilities and voicing their needs, how we as a tech partner can help reach out to them in a more proactive way. So the second component is more of preventing employee burnout on an ongoing basis. And I think a lot of the private sectors, we're paying people to take a vacation now, right? It's a lot of overcome, very, very much too much things on the plate. So we're trying to use our own technology to make sure that we can alleviate as much as the manual work as possible for our employees. That includes the data extraction as an example. We use a lot internally and for our customers, so that they don't have to create the traditional OCR as a way to extract invoices and the vendor information, and using AI to extract information and to get a workflow going. Anyway, so there are so many different use cases, and we're very excited about exploring more of the tools of serving the communities and also helping employees.
That's great. Thanks. Tom, I see your hand is raised. Let's hear from Tom, and then we'll go to Tony Powell, just to make sure.
Just real quick, I posted up a question in chat, so I won't address that. But one of the things that we have had to do is stand up an entire team to manage these virtual meetings, particularly for all the public agencies and public groups with public comment, Public Records Act type of correspondence. We went from really a two-man shop that ran the Board of Supervisors meeting to a team of 11 that run meetings across the organization, what feels like 24/7 for them. And I know that that's not unique, and I expect that probably to continue going forward with the hybrid approach of in-person and virtual for all public sector meetings going forward. So that's just probably a different impact than what we expected that engages the public better than we do today or did 2 years ago, but it has been a pretty big cost sinkhole, quite frankly, and will continue to be so going forward.
Yeah, Jerry, I see your hand is raised as well.
Yeah, I was gonna talk a little bit about what has improved. So when pandemic first hit, the city of San Jose was not very mobile. We didn't have that many laptops. And that was our first wave, and then cybersecurity, VPN. We invested a ton at that front wave in getting ourselves ready. So what can we keep? So now we're positioned. So this hybrid environment, really, from a technical point of view, that's no longer really an excuse, right? Because we put that initial investment in, and we're positioned to pretty much support whatever kind of model we want technically moving forward. The thing we're looking forward, someone's posting in the chat about the hybrid for the future is we find ourselves in the situation of really looking at the personas. What are the different kinds of populations, our workers and external, our customers, and it really should be customer driven first, right? What do they need and what do we need to support them? And so that's where we're at right now, is really kind of peeling it back and saying, what are we trying to do? And I just yesterday told the team I'm on the work group to help support this initiative. And I said, let's just stop talking about conference rooms right now. That's a false start. Everybody wants to go to slapping a bunch of high-fangled equipment into conference rooms. What we're meeting right now digitally. I don't need to put more stuff in a conference room. So let's just stop, kick that can down the road for a couple of months, and start focusing on what services truly we have to reopen for our citizens to come in, and then we'll start talking back our way into what staff have to come back on site to support that. So those are a few ideas.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Scott Dalrymple, let's bring you into the conversation. What are your thoughts, your insights here?
Well, as an infrastructure provider, I'd say in the first few months of being shut down, focusing on K-12 and then on cities and counties, everybody was freaked out about how do we go from, well, I was trying to solve my digital divide to now I'm 100% divided. Nobody has broadband, and I've got to find a way to distribute online curriculum in a way that no district had really thought how to do that. I think that's all settled a little bit over the last few months, but I'm really fascinated to learn what both the Council of Great City Schools and their cities and counties will do with American Rescue Plan funding if they're planning to try to fund some additional telecommunications infrastructure, what they already have whiteboarded for their technology roadmap, what type of funding mechanisms. I mean, we're trying to prepare our internal finance group to say, hey, look, there's billions of dollars that is going to have to be spent and spent soon. So what do we need to do as a service provider to make it easier for cities and counties to buy those services, given the constraints of this federal funding, knowing that it's not necessarily designed for sustainable long-term leases. It's, hey, here's a pot of money, go spend it wisely. Those are issues that I'd love to hear, you know, the other city county leaders talk about if you can.
Those are great points. While we wait to see if we do have a few minutes left, and I just want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from Dennis McAllis. Dennis, do you have any thoughts here that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been stimulating just hearing all of the exchange. What strikes me, I could talk a lot about Excella, my firm, from what we're going through, but we're wrestling with everything you all have mentioned. What strikes me is the challenging equation is very much from we provide a platform and finished products for licensure, permits, inspections, and so forth. What that means, as far as us being in a position to do a good job to partner, we have to continually find new techniques to build bridges in order to understand end-to-end process from a business perspective, constraints that IT may suggest are in the way, and then sometimes to help them bridge. You know, there could be shades of or degrees of vibrant, healthy interaction and collaboration between IT and business, sometimes not. So what we ultimately have to do is become very strong students of your game in terms of everything you're talking about. What's an acceptable protocol? How do you roll? How can we weave into effectively these new motions and these new behaviors so that we can be first just a good, attentive partner, but then understand where the gaps are and understand too how we navigate. So it is very much get much more personalized in your approach to communicating, just to be relevant. And to I think it was Tom's point that yes, we have done this before, but never with this fidelity, like what Dave was saying in Denver. I think that this is the opportunity to actually bring more fidelity and challenging discussions about objectives, timelines, resource constraints, and so forth. So lots of positives, some challenges, but I think it's actually giving us all a new opportunity. That's the way we're looking at it.
That's great. Phil, I'll hand things back to you. I know we have just
Sounds good.
left.
Just a couple minutes left, but last piece of big advice. All right, one piece of advice, and it's got to be quick. Jerry, what's your one piece of big advice?
Phase back into it.
Phase back into it. Linda Ding, your piece of advice.
All the problems we're facing today, technology is the underlying solution. So all of you, I give you a huge thought because you are strategic.
Thank you, Linda. Jeff, your one big piece of advice.
We don't have all the answers yet, but we'll figure it out.
Nice, I love it. Kate.
Keep participating in this community because you guys have got some great things going on.
Thank you, Kate. Janae.
Just focus on the well-being of your people and your teams.
Well said. Scott.
Keep grinding, find a way to be useful.
I love it. It's getting harder as we go, isn't it? So Beth, next.
I would say don't focus on the past because it won't be like that ever again.
I love that. Thank you, Tom.
It's always about the people on your teams and the people you serve.
About the people. I love it. Andrew.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal something that I heard yesterday that I thought was really profound, in that we can use this opportunity in the fact that we now trust our team members to work remotely to really ramp up our diversity, because now we can expand the boundaries of our hiring quite dramatically.
Well said, Andrew. Dennis.
I would land firmly on staying positive and supporting everybody as we adjust.
Heidi, I know you just came back in, but one piece of advice on collaboration, real quick.
I'm gonna say, listen to everyone that's on this call.
I love it.
Great
Heidi.
advice.
Oh, that was awesome. Kim.
Hey, lean in and show courage. It's it's a great opportunity to do something different.
Awesome. Mike Tim. We lost Mike for a second. Shantae, your last piece of advice.
Take time to rest and recharge.
Awesome. Leah.
The importance of being flexible and adaptable as we navigate this together.
Well said. Mike Tim, I'm going to give you one more chance for the last piece of advice, and you're on mute. And we got it. Believe it or not, we are at the end of our breakout session. Zach, you were awesome. Thank you. Attendees in this breakout session were amazing. The discussion was great. I really appreciate everything that you talked about, and there's so much wisdom. And I couldn't agree more with Heidi. When you came in, you said, listen to these people. You're right. We should all listen to the people that are around us. And that's what this event is about, the ability to engage and listen to each other. So thank you all for that. Well, it looks like everybody's starting to come back. So we're going to let everybody kind of log back in here as they come back from their sessions. And it looks like we have a full group of folks back. All right, so welcome back. I hope you had enjoyed our breakout sessions, and I want to thank our moderators, Terry, Alan, Joe, Zach. Well done. Thank you for being part of this, the breakout sessions. The discussion was great. I loved it. We're going to go ahead and get into our CIO roundtable. Now, for this portion of the agenda, everybody's back in. So what we need to do is make sure that we use the virtual hand raise, just like you did in the breakouts. We'll call on you, and remember to unmute yourself. So let's go ahead and get the discussion started. What I'd like to do with this group, there was so much information that Dustin and Joe provided. It was incredible information. Does anyone have some key takeaways, what you learned in the beginning of our sessions today from Dustin and Joe that you're going to take back with you? So who wants to be the first one to jump in? Just go ahead and hit your virtual hand raise. We got Tom. Tom, come on in.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, I think my biggest takeaway, maybe it's a two-part. One is I really need to get more up to speed on the newest technology. I've always been the mindset of, don't be the bleeding edge, make sure that it's tried and true, make sure it works. But I don't think the pace of technology changing as fast as it is that I can afford that anymore. So one is just make sure that I really know everything that's out there. And then second, I think it was Dustin suggested this when I asked about how do you leapfrog, would be start there and work backwards rather than start where we are and work upwards. I thought that I'm going to need to unpack that a lot more, but I think that's my big takeaway. Start with what is possible and work backwards to meet where we are.
Tom, I couldn't agree more that starting what's possible, that get those wins, find out those real things that you can accomplish. And over the years, you try to get our teams to do that. We try to get them to think different and innovate, but if it's too far out ahead of them, they may not get there. I love that idea. Well said. All right, who else wants to come in and talk about what they learned today and that they'd like to share with the group from Dustin and Joe? Frank, come on in.
I thought it was amazing that all the systems are built for us 55-year-olds, and I was like, oh well, I guess I relate. But that we have to think when we're solving problems and we're trying to take care of citizen engagement and keep talent within our groups, we have to have that young mind and that young perspective on technology and be able to build systems that empower them and keep them working for us, and also deliver as our customer, the young folks. And I thought that's a big takeaway for me.
Excellent. Rami, you wanted to come in.
Yes, hi everyone. I think the talk about digital identity is something that I found really enlightening. Here at Sacramento County, we did our first application using digital identity, and we are in the process of expanding that to other applications. So we did our utility billing, and now we're thinking about adding tax, adding revenue recovery, and then in time, just adding more, building more into it. The interesting part that with utility billing, our average adoption right now is more than 3,000 constituent a month, or household, or property owners, however you want to define it. But what we're seeing is that there is really an interest for that. The challenge is going to be is how you take a single line of business like utility billing and develop something that's greater than utility billing, that can be more adaptable to other applications and other business cases as well too. So this is something that I think that there is a lot of demand for based on the limited exposure that we have. And I think as we do more, we'll continue to see the adoption increase over time. So this, I think, was right on time, and I really appreciate that.
Excellent feedback. Thank you for sharing that. Wanda. Hi, Wanda. You're on mute, Wanda.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
There you are.
Oh, no, one of the things that is the whole idea is we'll be talking about how fast things have changed and pivoted. And then keeping up with how the demographics are changing. And so basically just talk about age alone. So we have all the young people, we have to be ready for them. They're digital. They don't want to deal with business the way it was before. So that's going to be another very, very, very fast driver for us. But we also have a aging baby boom generation. So the gentleman that just spoke talked about his age. I'm not going to reveal mine, but they also have to be able to engage with whatever the technologies are as well. And that's kind of part of the digital inclusion, in addition to areas where there's so many different nationalities and cultures moving in. And so that becomes important as we design these things. But also, I told somebody once before, they think of the senior citizens, oh, poor senior citizens, they'll never be able to use technology. And I have to tell you, if you show a senior citizen a game on social media or whatever, they get it and they can do it. So I think that as we're designing these things, we shouldn't have some old-fashioned notions that some of our populations just can't use the technology. Because what I remind people of, and I just show them this, okay, unfortunately for me, I could do anything personally I need to do, including buying things with drones, dropping it at my front door that I probably should not do. But this is how people live. And I think the government just has to keep in mind, this is how people work. They don't really care if they ever see the front door of a government building, again or ever. And so just a perspective of it's for everyone, but it can be done so that everyone can very quickly use and adopt. So it sounded like a soapbox, but I'm getting up there and all of us, certain age 55 and above up into the 90s, I have to tell you, can use technology.
So Wanda, as you were talking about that, I was thinking games, you're right. They could play, whether they play solitaire or whatever, but also pictures of their family.
Yeah.
Whoever thought of, that the ability, my mother's 87 years old and she texts me pictures of her dog, but it's just amazing how they're able to use smartphones and do what they got to do. I couldn't agree more. Ed Winfield, you wanted to come in.
I wanted to jump on that because I think if anything, this pandemic has shown that that everybody's using digital services. That barrier is gone. I mean, everybody's doing groceries. Amazon just blew the doors off their revenues again. Everybody's doing everything online. So this idea that somehow the public isn't going to get it, people won't understand it. I think we're beyond that. I think we can really assume that people are going to take advantage of these services.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be the way it is, the current situation and the future, all wrapped up into one. Yeah, I totally agree. Now I want to pivot a little bit in some of the time we have left. What does your future look like, and how can partners help you? So you have a bunch of partners that are listening. What's the best way for them to help you? So who wants to come in and talk about that first? What would your advice be about what they can do to help? So let's go ahead. I know someone's going to be brave enough to come in there. All right, Rob Lloyd. Rob Lloyd came into the chat. So Rob, you're it.
Yeah, actually, and I think your course structure, thanks for letting me weigh in on it, Phil, is I think you're preparing them to engage us in exactly the right way. So government has a structure, has a cadence, has certain power authorities, and understanding two things is really important when you work with us. One is, what is that cadence and structure that we work within? And number two is to understand what we're trying to accomplish so that you can partner with us to get at those goals. And that's going to be really more important in the next, I think, next 6 to 8 months, because we still have to figure out the rest of this roadway. And if you take the time to be a student of the field where you know how to engage us because you talk our language, you understand our budget constraints, you understand the ethics rules, that gives you a great foundation. But number two, for you to come in having done your homework, saying, hey, Rob, I read your strategic plan that's published. I see your IT work plan that's published online for a reason. We think we can help you in these specific areas. We're reading your procurements. We've worked with your partners. You can come in really fully formed to be a partner, not just a vendor who's spraying and praying stuff at us. And please don't do that spray and pray. It's just a waste of everyone's time.
Rob, thank you. Thank you for that. Greg, you wanted to come in. Gregory Scott.
Yes, I kind of agree with Rob. What Rob's saying too is, during the pandemic, a lot of you formed a great partnership with us. And now coming out of the pandemic, we still need that partnership. I mean, as we drive new technology within the government, we need you to be there to help us make that transition and keep that momentum up. Not coming in as a sales, but coming in as a true partner to take us to the next level. I think that's key.
Excellent point, Gregory. Thank you for sharing that. Making sure that solving the problems and getting where you need to go is the primary reason for that discussion to take place. Archie, come on in.
Yeah, I agree with both speakers just before, because the vendors come in and they try to circumvent certain things, but they don't understand your business. They don't understand you. They don't understand what your environment is, what you're capable of, or what do you do. So they come with all these things that you may have done 15 years ago, and they're trying to put that as something new to you. So if they would understand you as the individual agency, then they would know how to approach it and not try to circumvent the CIO, because they always try to get around them, and it always comes back to the CIO to do that. So if they would engage the CIO first and try to understand what we're doing, do a little bit of homework. I agree with both speakers before. Do your homework before on what we have to do, and not try to just do that hard sell, but come in as a partner to say, hey, we understand where you're going. Here's what we can do to help. And that would go a long way.
Archie, well said. Have that foundation of knowledge. So when you walk in, you can actually have that intelligent discussion and understand the nuances of doing business with government. Yes. I couldn't agree more. Archie, thank you. It says Gwinnett County, but is that Dorothy? So we'll unmute Gwinnett County.
I'm coming, and Dorothy's in the room. I was going to just echo everything else. Just because we have money to spend, or we know that you were going to be having money to spend, doesn't mean I'm necessarily looking to talk to every vendor in the world that has something to sell me. Yes, during the pandemic, we developed strong relationships with the partners that we had in-house. We've built technology plans that are going to carry us not just through the CARES Act, but through the next round of federal grant money. And then after the federal grant money is gone, still be able to have them there to support us through what we've built over the last 2 or 3 years. So it's real important to us that, yeah, we reach out to you, and when we come to you, that we're looking for your support. But I'm to the point. I actually heard one of my directors take a sales call the other day and said, I already talked to you before. I told you I wasn't interested then. I'm not interested now. So I know it's your job to sell me, but please don't.
Well, the good part of what's happening here today too, and the great part of digital communities, is that the partners that are part of this program care, and they want to know, and they want to engage, and they want to be educated in what government does. That's why they're all part of this today. So I couldn't agree more. It's know what you're saying and know what you're doing when you get in the room. But that's why these partners are part of this program. Rami, come on in.
If I could share a couple of things for me that I think probably very similar to the rest of CIOs. On average, I get somewhere about 150 to 200 emails a day. And sometimes those are like those machine generated or algorithm generated emails, and I just move them out of the way. I think the best way is kind of like what a lot of people said, is just have, you draft an email that doesn't look like it's generated, or a mass email. Reference something that, on our IT plan is always there. Reference that we were in a session like this, and then kind of show me why it's relevant to what we're doing today. I think for a lot of the vendors today, you heard a lot about what we're doing and what challenges we're having and what opportunities are there. If you can tie those together, you'll get the call back. If you don't, then it becomes harder to get the call back. For us in Sacramento County, we have a website that you could sign on to and register for all bids that come out of the IT departments. So that one of the first questions I'm going to ask you, are you registered for those RFPs or those opportunities or not? Because I can't go around them anyway. So the only way to get that is when we publish an RFP, if you're on the list and you're notified. And I can't tell you how many times I get people saying, well, we didn't know about the RFP. And I would say, well, were you registered for it? It's like, no. Yeah. Well, maybe if you register would be a good thing. Again, I think the way to get it with me, at least, I mean, in the afternoons, toward the end of the day, I answer all calls. In the mornings and during the day, not really, but good luck to you. I think our success depends on you to a large part, and I think yours depends on us to a large part. We just need to find a way where we can meet together.
Very well said, Rami. Thank you. Jonathan, it's great to see you. You get the last word before we have to wrap things up. Jonathan, come on in.
Okay, thanks. First, the vendors being responsive, and we saw that during the pandemic, spinning up our Amazon Workspaces solution. We said we need help, and within 2 weeks, we had a couple thousand people connected during the pandemic. And I wanted to turn around the question, I guess we're out of time, but turn around the question to the vendors. And I agree with a lot of the previous comments, but from the vendor side, what do they see that we might be missing that would be helpful?
Excellent, excellent point. Jonathan, thank you for that. Well, a couple things we need to do before we get started here. First of all, we need to go ahead and make sure that we thank the entire team that is behind the scenes. They are making magic back here with the technology. So I thanked all our moderators, but I want to thank Lisa, Diana, Tara, Margaret, and Trisha. Did I miss anybody, Lisa? If I did, make sure you put that into the chat for me. But I want to thank all of you. Mauricio, well done, sir. So I want to thank our team, Alan, Terry, Zach, Joe, Dustin. This has been great. Now, what I'd like to do before we go into our wrap up and play our fun game, because it's coming, I want to do a photo. So if everybody could turn your cameras on, it would be great. So everybody get your cameras on for me. And then when I give the cue, we're ready. We've got the team back here ready to do the photograph. I'm going to say, let's all smile for 10 seconds. It's not easy to do. That's like the hard thing to do at the end of the day, but we're going to do it. So if the team is ready, do I have the team ready to go to take the photograph? I'm thinking I do. They're not saying they aren't. So here, ready to go. We're going to go smile for 10 seconds. Ready, set, go. All right. I think we're ready. I think we got it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our wrap up today. And we wanted to do something fun. So everybody get your deck of cards. Remember, government people, you're playing for a $20 gift certificate, so not too shabby. And for the private sector, you're playing for nothing but bragging rights. So sorry about that, but you're playing for bragging rights. And if you could have your camera on, because it'll be fun as we do it. So here's how we're going to play this game. Now, I had a misguided youth at times and played a lot of pool, and we also played a lot of cards, but we used to cut cards and just play this game, right? Cut cards. Who had the highest card? Won. Remember those games when you used to play them when you were kids? Hopefully. And so what I would like you all to do is get ready to cut your cards. Anybody who gets an ace, put your hand up, okay? And if we don't have any aces, be ready. Then I'll ask for kings, queens, and so on. If we get any ties, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we do a card cutting to make sure we win. All right.
Hey, Phil,
So-
because we're cutting cards, people can hold their cut card up so we can all see it.
Yes, definitely. Everybody get ready. On 3, we're going to cut cards. 1, 2, 3, cut cards. And hold your card up. If you got an ace, please do your virtual hand raise.
I see Frank has an ace. Rami
Frank's
has
got
an ace.
Rami's got an ace. Make sure you put your virtual hand raise up for me. Anybody who got an ace, put your virtual hand raise up. It looks like we're going to have a runoff on the government side. Did anyone else get an ace on the private sector side? Wow, this came out a whole lot cleaner than I thought it was going to. I thought a bunch of people. All right,
Frank
so
gets bragging rights.
Frank gets bragging rights on the private sector side, but Rami and Lynn, get your deck together. Shuffle it up real quick, okay? Shuffle up the deck of cards, and then we're going to cut. Is everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. Lynn and Rami, cut your cards. What do you got? Rami's got a king. Lynn's got a 6. Rami, you won the gift certificate. We'll make sure we get that out to you. Congratulations. Big virtual applause for everybody. So thank you for doing that, and we really do appreciate it. I'd also like to make sure a couple reminders before we go to is first, Government Experience Awards. They're doing 2 weeks, May 12th, so make sure you get those squared away. Next, Digital Cities. It's going to launch on June 9th for all our city friends out there. Get ready to put your survey in. The chat is going to be full of the links for you. Also, now that this is coming to an end, we also want to say thank you to Renee Wynn, our keynote yesterday. We want to thank Dustin and Joe for the incredible work, all the fun that we had in the breakout sessions. A couple of other dates for you. Digital County Survey for our county friends out there. The awards and workshop is going to be on July 15th. So get that date there and make sure you can join us and learn what the #1 counties did. For the cities, we're going to have the same type of workshop and awards on November 16th. And our Gov Experience Awards are going to be on September 15th. You know,
And you never know, these could be live, Phil. They could be live.
It could be. We're not sure. We got the survey to think about it. But one thing I also want to think about and remember is we started earlier yesterday talking about the fact that everybody was at home and remote and worked hard to do everything for their citizens. You did it. You got it done and plus some. But you also had some fun with your families and you were able to do some things that you might not have done, you know, if it was the normal year. We sent you a cup of dice and cards just to say, enjoy playing games. It's fun to be with your families. It's fun to be with your friends. I understand. Enjoy the cards, enjoy the dice. It's just our little way of saying thank you. So a big thank you to our sponsors, and we'll put them on the screen. Excella, Amazon Web Services, CAI, Crown Castle, Dell Technologies, EasyVote, Infor, Laserfish, Medallia, Microsoft, Oracle, Pure Storage, ServiceNow, SHI, Spectrum Enterprise, Splunk, Team Dynamics, Yline, and Ubico. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe. We are going to do this live in 2022. We just know it. So get ready to travel to a fun place where we can all work together and be together to have these discussions. The chat's going to remain open for a short period of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for spending your time with us. You know, public sector, private sector partners, our friends, thank you for being here. And I look forward to our next event. So everybody have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks, everyone.